It seemed like a dream come true for her. However, as we started talking about the wedding plans, I noticed a change in her behavior. Mia began having very strong opinions about everything, from the venue to the guest list, and even what I should wear. It felt like she wanted to control every part of the wedding, making it more about her vision than ours. William was stuck in the middle, trying to keep both his mom and me happy, which made things even harder. As the wedding planning went on, the tension grew, and it started affecting my relationship with William. We began arguing about things that usually wouldn't bother us, all because we were trying to balance our wishes with Mia's expectations. I realized if we didn't deal with this soon, it could harm our future together. So, I suggested that William and I have a private talk to align our priorities and figure out how to handle the situation with Mia carefully. We agreed that our wedding should reflect what we both wanted and believed in. While we wanted to consider Mia's input, it was important for us to set clear boundaries. Together, we decided to sit down with Mia and gently but firmly explain our point of view. We hoped she would understand that while we valued her involvement, the final decisions would be ours. It was crucial for us to communicate openly to ensure our special day felt right for us as a couple. At first, it felt like a big moment, almost like I was gaining a new family member. Mia welcomed me warmly, eager to build a closer relationship. My excitement grew when she stayed with us for the weekend to help with wedding preparations and spend quality time together. I looked forward to bonding with her. However, as the weekend went on, her attitude began to change, and I started to feel uncomfortable. It began subtly on Saturday morning during breakfast. I made my favorite pancakes while William enjoyed his coffee outside. Mia smiled and commented, "Oh, I guess you don't worry too much about carbs, huh?" I laughed it off, but it hurt a little. Later, while looking through wedding dress catalogs, she pointed out a dress, saying it was beautiful but only suited for a certain body type, suggesting it wasn't for someone like me. I tried to brush it off, but her words made me feel self-conscious. During our shopping trip for decorations, Mia made another comment, this time about a friend's daughter who had lost weight for her wedding. She asked if I had considered doing the same. I was surprised and muttered something about being happy with my body, but her judgment was obvious. The next day, she went through my kitchen cupboards and remarked on the number of snacks I had, suggesting I should make healthier choices to avoid gaining weight before the wedding. Her constant focus on my weight was becoming upsetting. Even though her comments were always delivered with a smile and in a kind tone, they felt more and more pointed. What struck me the most was that she never made these remarks when William was around. When he was there, Mia was all charm and sweetness, but the moment he left the room, the criticism started again. It felt like I was living in two different worlds, one where I was loved, and another where I was constantly judged. At first, I didn't want to bring this up with William. We were newly engaged and so happy, and I didn't want to cause any problems. I told myself I could handle the situation. After all, I had always been proud of my curvy figure and confident in my own skin, something I had worked hard to achieve. Mia's comments were more annoying than truly hurtful, and I was determined not to let them affect my self-esteem. But as time went on, Mia's visits became more frequent, cutting into the limited time I had to plan our wedding on the weekends. Whenever I hoped to focus on wedding arrangements, Mia would show up either giving unwanted advice or just hanging around, making it harder for me to stay calm. Her constant presence was starting to stress me out, especially since she always seemed to imply she knew better than I did. One weekend, she called to say she'd be visiting again, and I felt a knot in my stomach. I really needed some alone time to get things organized without her input. Trying to stop her from coming, I mentioned I'd be out looking at wedding dresses. Unexpectedly, she got excited and insisted on coming along. I was caught off guard and didn't know how to refuse without sounding rude, so I had no choice but to agree. I agreed to let Mia come along, and when she arrived, she was very excited, but deep down, I was nervous about how the day would go. As we went to different bridal shops, Mia took on a motherly role, picking out dresses I didn't like and commenting on how certain styles didn't flatter my figure. It was overwhelming. When I finally tried on a dress I really loved, she said it was nice, but maybe too tight around the waist. She suggested I go for something more flowy, to be more flattering. Her comment crushed my excitement, making me second-guess my choice. By the end of the day, I hadn't picked a dress and felt disappointed. Mia went home, and I was relieved to have a break from her constant remarks. But soon after, she started texting, eager to know when I would go dress shopping again. I avoided answering her, determined to keep my next trip a secret. Unfortunately, William accidentally told his mom about my plans, and she quickly called to ask when she could join. Faced with another stressful day with her, I quickly made up an excuse, saying the bridal shop had a rule that only 3 guests were allowed, and my mom and maid of honor were already coming. Mia immediately questioned this strange policy, putting me on the spot. Flustered, I repeated the story and hurriedly ended the call. I felt guilty for lying to her, but I knew I needed to protect my own peace of mind. Even though I felt bad, I reminded myself that this day was supposed to be fun and exciting. I decided to focus on the positives and enjoy the support of my mom and maid of honor. When they picked me up, I put the guilt behind me and focused on having a good time. It didn't take long before I found a dress that felt perfect, almost like it was made just for me. Afterward, Mia stopped calling or texting me. She still spoke to William, which eased any tension between them, but she didn't reach out to me. In my excitement, I sent her a photo of me in the dress, hoping to share my happiness with her. Her only response was a thumbs-up emoji. Unsure of how to feel about that, I chose not to dwell on her reaction. As the wedding got closer, my days became so busy with last-minute tasks that I didn't have time to think much about her. When the wedding day finally arrived, everything was perfect. Walking down the aisle toward William felt magical. However, William was too upset to listen to her explanations and demanded she leave immediately. I had never seen him so distressed, and it broke my heart to see him in conflict with his mom on what was supposed to be a joyful day. The mood of the reception quickly turned sour. Guests could sense the tension, and the celebratory atmosphere we had carefully planned vanished. People started leaving early, and soon the reception ended much sooner than expected. The abrupt end to what I had hoped would be a perfect day was devastating. William and I went back to our hotel room, completely drained by the day's events. The emotional toll was heavy, and I felt deeply saddened that what should have been one of the happiest days of my life had been tarnished. After the wedding, Mia tried reaching out to both William and me through texts and calls, but we were too hurt and needed time apart to process everything. William was clearly torn. He loved his mother, but felt deeply betrayed by what she had done. It was a complicated situation with no easy solution. When we returned home after the wedding, I tried to move forward and focus on starting this new chapter of life with William, but memories of that day kept coming back, filling me with regret and wondering what might have been if Mia hadn't pulled her risky prank. Thankfully, our honeymoon provided a much-needed break. We threw ourselves into new experiences, enjoying moments of pure happiness and companionship, free from the recent stress. For those 5 weeks, life felt wonderfully normal, but reality hit as soon as we returned. When we pulled into our driveway, Mia was waiting for us at the doorstep. My heart sank, and anxiety gripped me. I knew this confrontation was coming, but I wasn't ready for it to happen so soon. The worst part was that Mia didn't start with an apology. Instead, she continued to defend her actions, insisting that her prank was harmless and minimizing the seriousness of what she had done. Her refusal to accept responsibility made the conversation even harder. William had finally had enough. He confronted her, explaining that she had crossed a line, and the only way forward was for her to admit her mistake and apologize to me. Until then, he said, their relationship would be limited to holiday gatherings, like distant relatives who only see each other occasionally. Mia was shocked by his firm stance and started to cry, but William stood his ground. I could see how painful it was for him to set these boundaries with his own mother, but he remained steadfast in supporting me. I felt safe and respected with William's support, but things took an unexpected turn when Mia suddenly showed up outside my office one day, surprised and not wanting to cause a scene at work. I agreed to meet her at a small cafe across the street. She was visibly upset, and as soon as we sat down, she broke down in tears, catching the attention of other customers. Mia expressed her disbelief over William's firm stance, saying he wasn't answering her calls or texts. She begged me to talk to him and help restore their relationship to how it was before. However, she still hadn't apologized for what she did at the wedding, acting like it wasn't that serious. I told her that instead of showing up unannounced and making a scene in public, she should take time to think about how her actions had affected both me and William. I reminded her that she had ruined my wedding day, and it wasn't fair for her to expect me to just forget that and convince William to forgive her. When she tried to defend herself, saying she didn't mean any harm and was only sorry about how I reacted, it became clear that she didn't really understand the impact of what she had done. As Mia continued crying, drawing more attention in the cafe, I felt increasingly uncomfortable and just wanted to leave. I told her I would see what I could do, but I didn't make any promises about fixing things between her and William. I left the cafe, still unsure if I could forgive her. Her apology only came after I pushed her for it, which made me hesitant. My mom advised me to forgive my mother-in-law, but I still felt conflicted. What do you all think I should do in this situation?
Casey entered the room and looked around. It was clear there wasn't much to do. Change the linens, wipe the surfaces, and remove the coffee cup from the table. Then, as per regulation, she would go to clean the bathroom. An elderly man, well-groomed, intelligent, and very wealthy, had lived here for 2 days. At first sight, Casey realized that this gentleman wasn't an ordinary person. Over her years working at the hotel, she'd learned to read people. Men like Mr. Riley didn't cause problems for maids. They were neat, polite, and clean. Cleaning up after them was a couple of trifles, and later the woman had been told that he was a big businessman, the owner of a chain of restaurants. Casey approached the bedside table. It wasn't uncommon for such clients to leave tips, often generous ones. Sure enough, next to the lamp, with its green shade, lay a thin wad of bills. Casey counted them and smiled. Perfect. This would cover the children's uniforms. September was just around the corner, and it was time to prepare for school. She mentally thanked the pleasant guest and wished him good fortune. Returning to her cleaning, Casey encountered an unexpected surprise while changing the bed linen. As she lifted the pillow, she discovered a locket underneath. It was simple, made of cheap metal, clearly an inexpensive old piece. This didn't fit the image of the respectable elderly businessman. Mr. Riley wore an expensive watch and a suit from a famous designer, obviously tailored. And here was this 5-cent medallion. How odd. Casey picked up the unusual item. The case was bent in several places, but the locket itself was clean, free of rust or scratches. It had been well cared for, apparently holding great value to Mr. Riley. Bringing it closer, Casey noticed it could be opened. Curiosity got the better of her. She lifted the lid, and an old black-and-white photograph appeared before her amazed eyes. It showed a laughing girl with strong dark eyes, a braid wrapped around her head in an old-fashioned style, and a round mole above her lip. Casey stared in astonishment, touching the mole above her own lip. She had inherited it from her grandmother Agatha. In fact, everyone said Casey resembled her greatly, and now she was looking at a picture of her grandmother, taken when Agatha was very young. There was no doubt about it. Casey even knew which photograph this image had been cut from. She'd seen it many times in an old family album. Grandmother had been standing on a riverbank among weeping willows, the sun shining brightly. She was smiling. Agatha had told Casey that photographers rarely visited their village. It was a significant event, so Agatha had dressed up carefully before posing. On that very day, she'd borrowed a beautiful dress from a friend and even applied light makeup. Casey kept gazing at her grandmother's laughing face. Agatha had passed away long ago, when Casey was still a teenager. The granddaughter had struggled with the loss of her closest and dearest person. Casey had loved her granny more than her own mother. In fact, it was her grandmother who had raised her while her mother tried to sort out her personal life. The grandmother's cosy village house often welcomed grandchildren, Casey's cousins. Grandmother loved and welcomed everyone, giving her grandchildren warmth and comfort, enveloping them in care as soft as a blanket. Even her voice was velvety and healing. It had been difficult for Casey after her beloved grandmother's death, but she had endured and adapted. Agatha had always told her granddaughter that she was strong and brave, that she would succeed. Though things hadn't worked out as well as she might have hoped, but Casey wasn't on the streets and could support her children adequately. The woman looked at the locket in her palm, snapped the lid shut and pondered. What was this? How had a portrait of her grandmother Agatha come in a locket belonging to a rich businessman? There was clearly some connection between Mr. Riley and Grandma Agatha. It couldn't be coincidence that the man carried her picture. Maybe he collected retro items, and Agatha's picture had simply caught his eye. He might be a descendant of that photographer, and yet Casey's inner voice suggested otherwise. Mr. Riley and Grandmother Agatha must have known each other, perhaps even been close. Something connected them. Casey knew she had to find out what it was. The woman continued cleaning. The medallion was now in the pocket of her uniform apron. Regulations required her to give everything found in the rooms to the manager, who would then contact the former guests. They would agree on how to return the lost items to the owner. But this time, Casey decided to do something different. She would look for Mr. Riley. She needed to talk to him, to understand why he carried a picture of her grandmother. Everything connected with her granny was a valuable part of Casey's life. She missed her. It was as if a message from a loved one had arrived. Casey would find out everything before the summer, before school started. She would have to go to the capital, a whole day's journey, 3 hours one way by train, and even in the capital, it was uncertain how long she would stay. She might even have to stay overnight. But that was okay. The kids would manage. Molly, at 14, was quite a grown-up young lady. Andy, a year younger, was a responsible and serious kid. They'd manage with 6-year-old Becky. It wasn't their first time. Their mother was always at work to provide for the children. The older ones understood perfectly well and didn't mind taking on some of her household duties. Her kids were good. Sometimes she couldn't believe that she could bring them up like that. Still, Casey was worried about their future. She dreamed that Molly, Andy, and Becky would grow up, get an education, and become successful people. But she realized that much depended on her. Cleaning the room, she found herself thinking about her life. She began to remember the past. Perhaps it was because of the unexpected encounter with Grandmother Agatha's image. Her hands were working, but her thoughts were far away. Casey was the product of a fleeting, casual affair. Her mother was barely 18 at the time. No education, no prospects, no special plans for life. Daphne was always like that. Flighty, in love, too carefree. In school she interrupted her studies 2 or 3 times, not at all because of lack of intelligence. Daphne simply preferred going out and dating to studying. It seemed silly and boring to her when there was so much fun and excitement around. She dated, most often guys much older than herself. She wasn't interested in boys her own age, as she put it. Well, at least because these older suitors already worked and could give her gifts. Agatha's head was spinning. She had raised her children alone. Her husband had died, drowning while saving a woman in the lake, when his youngest son was barely a month old. Agatha was left alone with 5 children, 4 sons and the daughter Daphne. Of course, the widow had to start working early, essentially doing the work of 2. How else could she feed such a brood? Agatha was attractive, but she refused all suitors. She was too busy with her children. The boys grew up well, all like their father. They helped their mother in the household, studied well, and engaged in sports. But Agatha didn't understand what was happening to her beloved Daphne. She had always been lazy and capricious, but in her teenage years, it was as if a demon possessed her. There began the absences from school and the dating. The girl responded to her mother's exhortations with rudeness. Neighbours advised Agatha to be stricter, saying the girl had gone wild. Agatha tried, but it didn't work out. Once, after a school meeting, she came home upset and devastated. She grabbed a twig, raised it over the frightened Daphne, but then lowered her hand. Agatha seemed to have raised all the children the same way, but it turned out like this. The boys caused no problems, but her daughter made up for all of them. Eventually, Agatha came to terms with it. She decided that Daphne would calm down with age, like her husband's sister. She had been the same. And then she married and became an exemplary wife and mother. After graduating from school, Daphne expressed her desire to go to the city. "Why?" Agatha asked, surprised. "You have bad grades. They won't take you anywhere. You won't pass exams." "Who needs this studying? I'll earn money. Do you know how much money there is in the city?" "And where will you work? What can you do?" "I'll find something. There are lots of opportunities there. I know for a fact. People have told me." "I won't let you go." Agatha was stubborn. Her heart told her that her daughter would be lost in the city. There were so many dangers there, and Daphne, she had her head in the clouds. "How will you stop me?" Her daughter grinned. "I turned 18 last week. I'll go where I want. I'm independent now. Get it?" True, this independent one had to be given money for the first time. It was all of Agatha's savings, but she couldn't let her daughter go to the city without a penny. "Mum, why did you give it to her?" lamented the eldest son when he found out. "Maybe if she'd been without money, she would have realized she wasn't capable of anything, that she should study, and would have returned." The other sons took offence that all the money went to the flighty Daphne, instead of being divided equally among them all. But Agatha was sure she had done the right thing. What kind of living and work could Daphne find without money? Thus, Daphne moved to the city. For almost a year, there was no word about her. Neighbourhood children who studied or worked in the city sometimes brought some news. It seemed that Daphne was living with a man. She didn't work, maintained a household. Agatha wondered. Daphne and a household? How is that possible? But Agatha quietly hoped that her wild daughter had indeed calmed down, that now everything would be all right in her life. However, her mother's hopes were not destined to come true. One rainy fall evening, Daphne appeared on the doorstep of her home. Her brothers had already left, some to study, some to work. Agatha was home alone. Seeing her daughter, the woman gasped. Beautiful Daphne had turned into a haggard creature. Her face bore an unhealthy skin tone, characteristic of people who abuse alcohol. Most surprisingly, in her hands, Daphne held a baby, in a faded, apparently previous used orange blanket. "Meet your granddaughter," Daphne said in a husky voice. "Casey, named after her daddy, who doesn't give a damn about her." Agatha nearly fell over from shock. She hadn't realized she was a grandmother again. Now she had 3 grandchildren, 2 from her eldest son and 1 from her daughter. The woman let her daughter and the child into the house. It turned out that Daphne had lived for a long time with a man much older than herself. He was from another city, had quarrelled with his family, left and started a new life. He met Daphne and they got together, based on their love for the same lifestyle, partying and crowds of friends in the house. The man worked at a construction site doing odd jobs. They lived on his irregular but quite decent earnings. He was a handyman, the type in demand everywhere. If he hadn't been drinking, he'd have been worth a lot. Then Daphne realized she was expecting a child. Her boyfriend wasn't happy at first, but quickly realized children meant child benefits, and stopped pushing his partner to get an abortion. By the time Daphne had the baby, much had changed. The man somehow reconciled with his legal wife and left for his homeland, leaving Daphne alone with her problems. After the maternity hospital, she lived for a while in their rented apartment. It was paid until the end of the month. Then she went back to her mother's house. Where else could she go? Agatha took pity on her wayward daughter, assuring her that everything would be all right. "I'm with you. We'll manage together. We'll raise the girl." "Thank you, Mum." Agatha was even glad that everything turned out this way. She thought that now Daphne would wise up. Children, they're good for growing up. But as soon as she came to her senses, Daphne left for the city again, leaving her daughter with her mother. Agatha didn't see any child support. The negligent mother received it in the city and spent it on herself. It was hard for Agatha to raise little Casey, but she didn't complain. The child was like a ray of light, a source of happiness and energy. Daphne appeared occasionally when money ran out, or when she hadn't a beau and needed a place to stay. She had no warm feelings for Casey. Neighbours suggested to Agatha that she deprive her daughter of parental rights, so that there would be more benefits and everyone would live more peacefully. But Agatha didn't do it. She felt sorry for Daphne, and there was still hope in her heart that she would come to her senses. But it didn't work out. Daphne eventually disappeared. They searched for her for a long time, finally finding her in another region, in a penal colony, where she had been sent for theft. She never left that place, dying within its cold walls from diseases acquired over years of a troubled life. Agatha worried, cried, and blamed herself, believing she had missed something in raising her only dearly loved daughter. But Casey, she felt nothing when she heard the news. Nothing at all. Her mother was a stranger to her, unfamiliar, almost even unpleasant. And when her grandmother passed away, it was like the world turned upside down. She was still young then, barely 16, and was taken into the family of her older uncle. His wife didn't like her niece. She tried not to show it, but Casey felt and understood everything. The uncle himself treated the girl coolly enough. The brothers didn't like their sister Daphne because of how much trouble she caused the family. Apparently, they transferred this feeling to her daughter Casey. After Agatha's, the girl felt lonely and abandoned. Although she had relatives, Casey knew she shouldn't rely on them. She could only rely on herself. Casey, remembering her grandmother Agatha's precepts, planned to study and even enrolled to the college after graduation. Her grades were good. The girl had always been characterized by diligence and perseverance. She was given a dormitory, and the girl happily moved out from her relatives. It wasn't pleasant to feel redundant all the time. At first, the girl devoted herself to her studies, and then she met Greg. He was a young man, handsome and blue-eyed. He came to the college where Casey studied to visit a friend, saw the young girl, and smiled at her. A light, casual conversation ensued. Casey melted under his gaze. She hadn't felt so warm and good at heart for a long time. It seemed that here he was, a man who cared about her. Greg asked her on a date, and she agreed with pleasure. Next to him, the girl felt protected. She wanted to hope that her loneliness was over, that there was a man ready to take care of her. Greg seemed just like that, sensitive and reliable. After the date, he invited her to his room. The man was staying at a hotel. Casey agreed without a second thought. Already later, she realized what was what, but she did not resist him. What difference does it make? Anyway, they will be together now. But Casey was wrong. Greg disappeared as suddenly as he appeared. From the very friend he had visited, Casey learned that Greg had long been married, had 3 children, worked as a trucker. In general, Casey became one of his many one-night stands. It was frustrating, but what could she do now? Casey experienced disappointment, made important conclusions for herself, and lived quietly until she realized she was expecting a child. Casey rushed to the clinic. She didn't know what to do herself, so the doctor's words that she had missed the term for termination of pregnancy even pleased the girl. At least now she wouldn't have to make a choice. The child would be born. Of course, the young student faced many problems. How to study, where to live, what to live on. Amid worries and concerns, Casey missed the exam session and was expelled. Well, anyway, she couldn't study with a child in her arms. She had to return to the village, to her grandmother's old house, which was now hers. Many years ago, after her daughter's death, Agatha had signed the house over to her granddaughter, which again displeased her sons. "It's nothing. They're successful and established. They're men, after all. They won't be lost. But Casey has no one except me. She definitely needs her own corner, so she'll feel more confident in life," Agatha explained to the neighbours, and Casey overheard everything. Now the young woman was glad that she truly had a place to go. True, during the girl's time living first at her uncle's, then in the dormitory, the house had fallen into a state barely suitable for habitation. Nobody had taken care of it, but Casey wasn't afraid of that then. She had a roof over her head, and that was enough. With her own strength, as best she could, Casey made it cosy. And then Molly was born. This event turned Casey's whole world upside down again. She looked at the tiny baby girl, filled with tenderness and warmth, and realized, for the sake of this tiny bundle, she would move mountains. Now her own mother's actions bewildered Casey even more. How could one voluntarily give up their own child, preferring unfamiliar, unpleasant men to a daughter? And while Casey strived to be an exemplary mother, she began to receive an allowance for the child. It became easier financially. Casey learned to save money, stock up on food, and buy things on sale. The young mother managed frugally, which made her feel proud and strong. The plan was to raise Molly until she could go to kindergarten, and then Casey would work at the local post office, or library, or shop. Maybe she'd be able to finish her studies in time, because it was necessary to settle down in this life somehow. But the young mother's plans were not destined to come true. One day, Stapleton West came to the village. Casey knew him. He was the neighbour's son, 5 years older than her. He had finished his studies, gone to the capital, and entered a university there. It was said that he had been hired by some big company. Stapleton came for his sick mother, deciding to take her to the city. The treatment there was better, and life in general more interesting. Casey had once been in love with him, as had a good half of the girls in their village, so Casey, of course, didn't mind when he came to chat a little. That evening, Stapleton was slightly drunk, having apparently met his friends beforehand. "So that's how your life turned out," the young man said, shaking his head, and Casey at this moment admired his intelligent grey eyes. "Too bad. You were such a smart and beautiful girl. I thought a different future awaited you." "Maybe it still does." "Maybe," Stapleton said, not too confidently. Then he began to talk about himself, about his life in the city. To the villagers, Stapleton seemed the epitome of success and luck. It turned out that everything wasn't so simple. Stapleton was deeply unhappy inside. Career achievements weren't easy. He had to adjust to others, sometimes stepping on his own principles, fawning before those in power. In the end, Stapleton and Casey woke up in each other's arms. In the morning, Stapleton was horrified, apologized, and hurried to leave Casey's house. It was painful for her to see and realize all this. She had felt a kinship of souls with this man the night before. They seemed to understand each other very well. She wanted to believe that this was the beginning of something big, beautiful, and real. Soon after Stapleton's departure, Casey realized she was pregnant again. She knew she couldn't get rid of the child because there was Molly, small, sweet, alive, and inside her was the same baby. She couldn't hurt him. She just couldn't. Nothing was required of Stapleton. Casey didn't want to look for him from the beginning. Even if she did find him, He wouldn't be happy to hear the news. No, Casey didn't want to settle things. She decided that she could manage on her own. Andy was born. With 2 babies in her arms and no money, it was hard for Casey, of course. But the children pleased her, gave her strength and served as motivation. No matter how difficult it was, Casey still felt happy. True, the neighbours joked, often comparing her to her mother, saying that a bad bird, a bad egg. It was offensive. Casey, unlike the woman who gave birth to her, didn't abandon her children. She loved them, raised them herself, and gave them every spare minute of her time. Molly and Andy grew up, pleasing their mother with excellent health. They were smart, clever, and nice. It was always fun together. The kids grew up and went to kindergarten. Casey went to work. Not at the post office or in the library, as she'd dreamed. There were no places there, but at the farm. The labour was hard, but the salary wasn't bad by village standards, and, importantly, regular. Casey didn't even think about returning to her studies. There simply wasn't enough time or energy. Meanwhile, her grandmother's house was constantly deteriorating. Everything in it required repair, the application of men's hands. Casey herself couldn't cope. One day she realised that it couldn't go on like this. They needed to move to the city and sell the house before it completely fell apart. That's what Casey did. With the proceeds, she rented an apartment in the city for a year and immediately got a job. She worked in cafes and restaurants as a kitchen assistant and cleaner, and even managed to work as a cashier. There was enough work for those who weren't afraid of labour. The children went to kindergarten. Casey earned money, even managed to save a little for a rainy day. In general, the woman was quite satisfied with her life until the children went to school. But when school started, she had to spend more money. Books, school uniform, trips with their class, gadgets, fashionable clothes. All this required more financial investments. And Casey didn't earn that much. She was used to saving money, barely making ends meet, believing that she could cope with financial difficulties. Casey didn't want Andy and Molly to feel inferior among their classmates. But what could she do? She had to take an extra job. Cleaning ladies were needed everywhere. Tired and sleep-deprived, Casey became a shadow of herself. Sometimes such despair would come over her that it was hard to breathe. But she held on for the sake of her children, her son and daughter. She tried not to show them her fatigue or fear. At times, sad reflections overwhelmed Casey. She was only 26, yet she had already been through so much. With 2 children in her arms, she had never been in a serious relationship, something she was ashamed to admit. In the whole world, she had no one to help her, except for her uncles. But they had never loved her mother, so they had no feelings for their niece. She couldn't count on them, and it was terrifying to feel so alone and helpless. No matter how hard Casey fought or how much she worked, she still earned mere pennies, just enough to avoid homelessness and starvation, nothing more. At least Molly and Andy understood and didn't demand the impossible from their mother. On the contrary, they helped as much as they could, taking on household chores, cleaning, even cooking. Their mother was always at work. Casey came home exhausted, quickly finished some chores, wished Molly good night, and fell asleep before her head could touch the pillow. A few years later, a man came into her life. Dean was a little older than her, sullen, silent. Dean worked in an apartment repair firm, where Casey worked part-time as a cleaner 3 times a week. At first, she didn't notice him. Dean didn't stand out in any particular way, but then he helped her carry full buckets of water to the 4th floor and volunteered to wipe the windows under the ceiling. He could reach from the floor, while Casey would have to risk her health on a rickety stepladder. One day, Casey realised that this man cared about her, something no one had ever done before. The discovery struck her pleasantly. Casey looked at the silent Dean with new eyes and noticed his rather pleasant appearance. They started talking. It turned out that Dean used to live in a village. He had a wife there. Then his wife began to scold him for his meagre earnings, and one day she left him for another man. Dean was left all alone, broken and confused. He decided to move to the city to earn money. In his native village, everything reminded him of his past life and his wife's betrayal, and people looked at him with sympathy. Dean disliked these looks. In the city, he rented an apartment and got a job. Being handy, Dean made good money doing repairs. He worked for the firm and took on side jobs. He grew accustomed to his quiet and measured life. He even began to like it. And then there was Casey, a single woman who had to work so hard to provide for 2 children, abandoned and unsupported. At first he felt just pity for her. Then entirely different feelings emerged. Dean suddenly realised that he wanted to be close to this woman, to care for her and protect her from life's troubles. He wanted to become her rock, behind which she could feel cosy and calm. Casey listened to him and felt waves of happiness spreading through her body. Every word of Dean's was weighty and sincere. Of course, doubts flitted through her mind. What if he was lying? What if Dean was just like the others? What if he was just playing at love, only to disappear in the end? It was difficult to trust this man completely, but Casey decided to take a chance, and she didn't regret it. Dean moved in and immediately took on all the men's work, fixing plumbing problems, putting up the shelves in the bathroom, and finally hanging the curtain rods correctly. The house immediately became cosy and beautiful. It turned out that Dean was not only a handyman, but also a wonderful cook. From mere leftovers in the fridge, he created mind-boggling dishes. With him, Casey practically forgot about financial problems. Dean earned quite well and spent generously, buying quality food, sweets and clothes for the children, and gifts for his wife. Andy and Molly immediately accepted and loved him, and he treated the children very warmly. Dean often took them for walks, to the movies, or to the amusement park. He helped them with their lessons, played with them, and had long conversations with them on various topics. Casey could hardly believe her happiness. Her life became brighter, happier, fuller. She no longer had to work herself to death at several jobs. There was no need for it now. She had energy for life, for joy, for rest, the most important thing. Casey was no longer alone. She had a man she loved and who loved her. She was now cared for, supported, protected, and defended. It felt incredible. A couple of years of happy life flew by. Casey believed this was how it would always be. So the news of another pregnancy made her happy, and Dean was overjoyed. He began to make plans for their own place. Rent was inexpensive for Dean, but he wanted stability. After all, 3 children were a big responsibility. So he began to take on extra jobs, working at construction sites, unloading rail cars and trucks, anything to save an extra penny. And then it happened. Something Casey still couldn't remember without tears. Dean was hit by a truck at a construction site. Due to fatigue and overwork, he violated safety regulations. Casey couldn't believe that the man she loved was gone. She was alone again, facing this cruel and unforgiving world where such terrible things happen. She felt as if a concrete slab was pressing on her chest. The world became grey and lifeless, as if it weren't real. She didn't want to think about the future without Dean. It made her panic. During that difficult period, Casey dreamed that the world would collapse in reality, and then there would be nothing. But these were dangerous thoughts. The woman understood. She had to live. She had to hold on for the sake of her children, who were also struggling to bear the loss of a loved one. And she also had Dean's baby living under her heart. He needed to be born healthy and strong. Casey took herself in hand for the sake of the children and continued the fight. Fortunately, Dean had kept their savings at home in a private place rather than in the bank. Otherwise, Casey wouldn't have been able to access the account. She and Dean had never had time to get married. They were only planning to. Soon the woman gave birth to little Becky, and while she was just a baby, the family barely survived. They stretched their modest savings until the baby went to kindergarten and Casey went to work. Fortunately, the little girl was rarely sick, so her mother could work without taking sick leave. Then Casey received an offer for her dream job. One of the tenants in the building where Casey mopped floors in the mornings suggested she interviewed with the local hotel director. "You're slender, cute, and used to hard work. It's noticeable. Most importantly, you know how to smile and communicate with people. We need such people in our hotel. There's a maid position vacant right now. Try it. It's better than cleaning dirty entrances." And Casey tried it. She didn't believe she'd succeed, but she did. She was hired at the hotel. The work wasn't taxing, quiet, even pleasant. The salary was more than decent, plus tips, sometimes very generous. Life became much easier. Casey still missed Dean, his care, his voice, his scent. She was still a single mother of 3 children, and yet life began to regain its colour. Casey even managed to take the children to the sea one day. It was the first time both the children and she had been to the coast. The sea looked fantastic. They were all still impressed and dreamed of repeating the trip some day. However, it was still hard for Casey to accept that she was alone again. She worried, if something happened to her, where would the children go? It was unlikely that her uncles would take them, as they didn't even know the children existed. They had long since lost touch, becoming complete strangers. Casey often remembered her grandmother Agatha and imagined what the world would be like if she was still alive. Probably the grandmother would live with them, read bedtime stories to the children, bake pancakes for her great-grandchildren, call Casey her sweet girl, and hug her. She remained the most significant figure for Casey. That's why her photograph, found in an antique locket under the pillow of a wealthy businessman, so excited the woman. Casey couldn't wait. She had to find out as quickly as possible what it meant. Finding information about Mr. Riley in the digital age took only 5 minutes. Casey learned that he was alive and working in the capital. She found the address of the main office, learned its working hours, and the next morning she was on a train, watching the passing scenery. At work, Casey took a day off at her own expense and gave her children instructions for the whole day. She didn't worry about the older ones. They could manage cooking, cleaning the house, taking a walk, and picking up Becky from kindergarten in the evening. Everything would be all right with them. Casey twirled the locket in her fingers, looking at it, occasionally opening the lid and admiring her grandmother's photograph. Would Mr. Riley accept it? He might get angry. He might think she stole it. What did he have to do with her granny? Casey was worried and anxious, but she knew she had to find Mr. Riley. Casey arrived at Mr. Riley's office in the afternoon. She entered and answered the receptionist's question about her destination. To her surprise, she wasn't stopped. The receptionist, a polite, smiling girl, only told her which office the chief was in. To Casey's luck, it was a time when anyone could come to Mr. Riley to discuss his restaurants, complain, offer suggestions, or express gratitude. Mr. Riley believed it was important to keep his finger on the pulse to stay on top. He always listened carefully to the opinions of customers, employers, and partners. Casey entered Mr. Riley's office unhindered. She had expected something more pompous and luxurious, given that he was a wealthy man, but he seemed to prefer simplicity and ergonomics. Casey entered and said hello. Mr. Riley cordially invited her to sit in the chair opposite his desk. His open look and sincere smile helped Casey gather herself. The excitement had dissipated, but she still didn't know where to begin. All the prepared phrases suddenly fled her mind. "Do you have a question for me? Or perhaps a suggestion?" Mr. Riley prompted. "Don't be shy. You can say whatever you want. I welcome honesty. I respect the truth, even if it's not always pleasant. So you can tell me whatever is on your mind. Didn't like the service in the restaurant? Or maybe something was wrong with the cuisine?"
"No," Casey shook her head. I'm here to see you about something else entirely." With those words, she pulled a locket out of her purse. "I'm the maid from the hotel where you stayed. I found this in your room." Mr. Riley's face changed, his eyebrows raised in surprise, and a light of joy lit up in his eyes.
"So you found it!" he exclaimed, clearly delighted. "And I was worried, thinking for some reason I'd lost it at the station. I was sure I had slipped the locket into my pocket before I left the hotel, as I always do."
"You left it under your pillow."
"Old age is no joy," joked Mr. Riley.
Casey handed the medallion to the owner, who hurriedly took it in his hands, stroked the lid with his thumb. It was obvious that the thing was dear to him.
"Did you come here specifically to give it to me?"
The man spoke thoughtfully, scrutinizing Casey sitting in front of him.
"But why? You could have handed it to the administrator. They would have called me, and I would have sent someone. Why go to all that trouble?"
"The thing is, my grandmother is in the picture."
Mr. Riley shrugged. He was no longer smiling.
His face took on its most serious expression.
"What was your grandmother's name?
The one in the picture?"
"Agatha."
"Agatha. I can't believe it."
Mr. Riley looked shocked to the core. He glanced at the medallion, then at Casey, and red spots appeared on his cheeks.
"Tell me, please, how do you know my grandmother? And why do you carry her picture with you everywhere? You see, Grandma, she's my closest person. I have no one else, and never had. She raised me. It's important for me to know everything about her."
"I see. The thing is, your grandmother is probably the person closest to me too. I looked for her for a long time. Then I realized it was useless. And here you are. This won't be a short conversation. Perhaps some tea or coffee."
Casey shook her head. It wasn't tea she needed right now.
"All right."
Mr. Riley began his story.
"I was born in a remote village to alcoholic parents. From childhood, I knew neither love nor affection. I grew up like a weed, taking care of myself as best I could. The neighbours sometimes helped, feeding me when my parents went on benders for weeks. I didn't realize I lived in poverty, or that adults should love, protect and care for children. I thought everyone's life was like mine, so I didn't worry about my fate. Such suffering was alien to a small child. Agatha was then a very young woman. From the adults, I knew her father died at the war, and her mother died after the war. Her heart gave out. Agatha was kind and cheerful,
She often treated me to candies, and sometimes called me Mowgli, ruffling my hair. It was pleasant. Then there was a fire in the house where I lived with my parents. It happened during yet another party. I had grown accustomed to these endless gatherings. The adults quarrelled, laughed, talked, fought, kissed, fell asleep on the floor, while I played quietly in the attic, or slept there, wrapped in my grandfather's old coat. That night, I woke up struggling to breathe. I jumped up, coughing. It was pitch black, but not from the night. Something dark swirled around, stinging my eyes and irritating my lungs. Smoke. Even though I was only 7, I realized the house was on fire. Surely one of the adults had failed to extinguish a cigarette. My granny, when scolding my parents, often said they'd burn the house down one day. It seemed her prediction had come true. I was terrified. I opened the attic window, considering jumping, but the ground was too far. I'd break my neck. I didn't want to return to the smoke-filled room, but what choice did I have? There was no other way out. I groped my way down, bumping into scattered objects. Downstairs, something unimaginable was happening. Flames crackled and roared, quickly devouring wallpaper, curtains and furniture. The exit seemed impossibly distant. Things fell from the ceiling, billowing around me. I couldn't breathe. I'd never been so scared. I screamed, but no one was there. Where had everyone gone? Had they burned or fled, abandoning me? My head was ringing. I tried to inhale but couldn't. Everything spun, blending, and I fell into darkness. Before losing consciousness, I thought I was dying. So, I was astonished when I opened my eyes to see stars high in the sky. I could breathe easily, and the night's coolness was refreshing. Someone was carrying me. I turned my head and saw Agatha's worried, soot-stained face. She had pulled me from the fire. "You're alive," she said. "Thank God you're alive. I thought I was too late." That's when I noticed the others. People were running towards us from all directions. Someone wrapped me in a blanket. Another gave me water. I turned to see flames engulfing my house, bursting from the attic window I'd left moments ago. "Agatha, you pulled the boy from the fire," muttered one of the men. "We were afraid, but you did it. You're an incredible person." Agatha took me in. "The boy has nowhere to live now. He's alone. I'm alone. We'll be together," she said. Later I learned my parents had died in the fire. I was surprised, but not particularly upset. It was strange to realize they were gone. The fire had indeed been started by some drunken guests. Some of my parents' companions escaped, others perished with them. The same fate would have awaited me. I lost consciousness from the smoke, but before managing to scream, and Agatha heard that scream. She, like others, had come to the fire, hoping to help any survivors. The flames raged inside, their glow visible through the windows. Black smoke billowed from every crevice. People tried to dissuade Agatha, even held her back, thinking it was hopeless. But she heard the child's cry and couldn't stay away. The brave girl rushed into the burning house, found me, and carried me out in her arms. The fire scorched her eyebrows and eyelashes, which didn't grow back for a long time. Scars remained on her palms from the burns she suffered while rescuing me. I loved Agatha's place. It was clean, and there was always food. She was cheerful and kind, read books to me, told me stories and cared for me. She arranged my first real birthday party, Mr. Riley recalled with a smile. She baked a cake and bought me a present, a soccer ball, as I remember. She invited the local children. That's when I started playing with other kids. Before that, they hadn't really accepted me. Agatha was very young, but she cared for me like an experienced mother. We lived in perfect harmony. She taught me so much. It must have been challenging for her. I was completely wild, like Mowgli. Agatha taught me how to use cutlery, make my bed, and communicate with people. She taught me letters and then reading. Most importantly, she loved me dearly, hugged me, and often said kind words. I thawed with her, transforming from a wild animal into a human being. I thought it would always be like that. Agatha decided to adopt me and drew up all the necessary documents. It turned out to be more complicated than expected, requiring paperwork and visits to various institutions. Agatha left me with the neighbours and went to the city. She thought it would take a week, but it dragged on for a month. Knowing I would miss her, Agatha left me a locket before she departed. You see, I'll be with you. If you get lonely, open the lid and look at me. You can tell me all your worries and troubles. I'll hear them through the locket, I promise. So don't worry. I'll be far away, but still near you. And at that very time, my relatives appeared. My mother's cousin and her husband. They suddenly wanted to take me, but don't think she had any familial feelings, none of the sort. Later I discovered it was all about inheritance. My grandmother had died. My mother, and therefore I, was one of her heirs, and this woman took me into her custody to get her hands on my share. I must say, she succeeded. I was taken far away to a town on the other side of the country. I cried. I didn't want to leave my village or part with Agatha. She had become closer to me than my mother. She had saved my life, helped me become a normal person, and taught me everything with love and care. But no one asked for my opinion. The neighbours generally thought it was right. The boy should be with relatives, not with a strange young girl. Agatha herself is almost still a child. She needs to get married and have children of her own. You'll go to your relatives. That's right, that's fine, they said to me. On the journey I had a tantrum. The mother's cousin quickly stopped it with a ringing slap. Subsequently, she was not particularly gentle with me. They didn't like me, tolerated me barely because of the inheritance. It was cold and uncomfortable to live there. I tried not to be at home. At school I enrolled in all the additional lessons I could, just to spend less time with them. When I was 14, my loving foster mother sent me to a boarding school outside the city. After graduation I joined the army and became a driver. After my service, I never visited the family. To their undoubted joy, I rented a room and got a job at a dairy as a driver. The boss noticed me and my eagerness to work and helped me enter college. I was reluctant at first, but I couldn't go against his boss. Surprisingly, I became engaged and emerged as the top student in my course. Then everything developed organically. After graduation, I was invited to work as a manager in a famous restaurant. There I gained experience. Gradually, a plan to open my own cafe took shape. I saved money for a down payment and started my own business. It was challenging, ups and downs, learning from mistakes, hard work. From morning until night, I delved into the smallest details, trying to understand and control everything. As a result, I managed to create a chain of restaurants with an excellent reputation. Now I had everything: money, my favourite business, power and strength. I tried to find Agatha. I wanted to see her, thank her, and look again into the kind eyes of the person who had given me a second life. I wanted to tell her about myself. I knew that Agatha was also interested in my fate. But many years had passed. The village where I was born and grew up no longer existed. It was impossible to find Agatha because I, as it turned out, knew almost nothing about her. Only her name and approximate age. Even hired detectives were unable to accomplish the task. That locket. It's been my talisman all these years. It gave me strength. I can't explain it. I did talk to Agatha when I got older, and I realized that she couldn't really hear me. It's a habit, just the way it is. I had complained to her about my foster mother, about the mean teachers, and, it did make things easier. A kind of psychotherapy. I got married. I had 2 sons. If a girl had been born, I would have named her after Agatha. I gradually resigned myself to the fact that I would never find traces of the girl who had saved my life. And now, you appeared with the medallion. It is unbelievable, incredible that it was her granddaughter who found Agatha's last gift to me. Is she still— Mr. Riley hesitated to ask the most important question of all.
Casey realized and shook her head. She wished she could make him happy, but Agatha hadn't been alive for many years.
Well, of course she must have been quite old by now, Mr. Riley said, shaking his head sadly. But you know what? This isn't all accidental. Agatha brought you to me on purpose. I know for a fact it's a miracle that we found each other, and now we shall never be lost. I'll introduce you to my family. They know about Agatha and will be pleased.
They stood in the old village cemetery, Mr. Riley and Casey. The man gazed at the gravestone, at Agatha's portrait, who looked at visitors with a sad, affectionate smile. In his hands was a bouquet of roses. Mr. Riley turned out to be a simple and very pleasant man. He and Casey had grown close in the month since their acquaintance. The man's family warmly accepted Casey and her children. Now they were kindred people, close to each other, and all thanks to Agatha, her huge heart and kindness. Casey suddenly realized that Mr. Riley wanted to be alone. She stepped aside, pretending to look for the grave of one of her relatives. The woman saw Mr. Riley saying something quietly. Probably he had a lot to say to Agatha. Later, Mr. Riley and his grandchildren, along with Casey and her children, will go to the movies and spend a warm family evening together. Yes, now Casey had a whole family, and that was happiness. Dale woke up in a cold sweat, calming down immediately once he recognized the familiar surroundings of his own bed. A sense of relief washed over him. It was just a nightmare. Only moments ago he had been drowning in frigid water. It filled his nose, slid down his throat and invaded his lungs, preventing him from breathing. The shore was visible for fleeting seconds before it vanished. He was being pulled under the dark, chilling water. That terrifying memory still haunted his nightmares, so vivid and realistic that they left him drenched in sweat with a racing heart. Now, at 30, he was plagued by a deep-seated fear of water. He avoided swimming pools, lakes, rivers and seas. He enjoyed relaxing on the beach, sunbathing, grilling kebabs and having fun with friends, but he steered clear of the water. He couldn't even venture into the shallows. To him, the tranquil, dark waters concealed a lethal threat. He watched others swimming and diving with a sinking heart. Dale kept his fear a secret, never revealing it to anyone. When asked why he didn't swim, he simply replied that he couldn't. But that was a lie. Dale was an accomplished swimmer. He had even won regional competitions, with his trophies, medals and certificates proudly displayed by his mother. At the tender age of 12, he earned a sport category before a memorable seaside trip with his parents. This achievement filled him with pride. He felt heroic as the first in his group to reach such a milestone. Dale relished in his status as a distinguished swimmer and athlete, eager for everyone to recognize his expertise. At the beach, he looked with a mix of pride and mild disdain upon his peers, who were still frolicking in the shallow end with flotation aids. One evening, Dale went to the beach with his father, while his mother stayed back at the hotel to care for his younger sister, Hope. The little girl had fallen ill, likely due to food poisoning. The beach was quiet that day, with a refreshing breeze sweeping across. The sea appeared a bit choppy and unusually cold, signalling the end of the weeks-long heat. Dale noticed 2 local girls on the pier, their skin tanned to a deep shade, their feet bare, and their hair flowing freely in the wind. One of them, a slender blonde girl with piercing blue eyes, particularly captivated the boys' attention. Motivated to impress them, Dale decided to put on a performance. He stripped down to his bathing shorts and dove into the cold waves. "Be careful," his father warned. "The sea is rough, don't swim too far out." But Dale didn't seem to hear. He frolicked in the waves like a young dolphin, showing off his diving skills. The girls stopped their conversation to watch him, which thrilled Dale. He swam further away from the shore. His father, confident in his son's swimming abilities and maturity, left to buy some boiled corn. Suddenly, when he was quite a distance from the shore, his leg cramped painfully from the calf to the thigh. His body, which had previously obeyed every command, suddenly became uncooperative. He tried to paddle with his strong arms, but his lower body was pulling him down. With the shore too far away, there was no help in sight. Few visitors were present at the beach. The girls on the pier disregarded the boy who was striving to impress them, instead focusing their attention on something in the distance. Dale was terrified. He could no longer row due to the sharp pain in his leg, which caused his vision to darken. He then submerged underwater for the first time. All sounds faded away. The seagull's cry, distant laughter, the engine's noise, and a remote scooter. A constant hum filled his ears as he sank deeper into the overwhelming darkness. His lungs ached for air. Gathering his strength, he managed to surface briefly, took a quick breath, glanced at the seemingly distant shore, and submerged again. Dale surfaced several more times until his strength was completely depleted. His leg throbbed with pain, and he was consumed by fear. He sank to the bottom, realizing that he would never see the sun again. The darkness was terrifying, and he longed for the comfort of his mother's voice. As he started to feel dizzy from the lack of air, and his ears pounded intensely, he felt someone's strong, warm and reliable hands pulling him upwards, towards the light, people and sun. The boy clung tightly to his rescuer and began climbing up the man's wet back. The man pulled him away from himself firmly, and Dale submerged back into the cold, dangerous water. Fear flooded the boy's heart, and he reached for his rescuer again. "Don't squirm, we'll both sink," the boy heard a strained male voice. This sobered him, reminding him of his coach's stories about the behaviour of drowning people who often hindered their own rescues. It was difficult, but the boy stopped resisting, allowing the man to pull him towards the shore. Even in such a terrible situation, Dale noticed that his rescuer was an excellent swimmer. The man supported the boy's chest with one hand, while the other stroked through the water with confidence and skill. The shore was nearing. Finally, the boy felt the ground beneath his feet and began to cry only after he had pressed against it. The man helped him out of the water. To the 12-year-old boy, the man seemed old but strong, tanned and muscular. It was only when the boy grew up that he realized his rescuer had only been around 50 years old. "Are you okay?" the man asked, examining the boy carefully. "Never go into the sea in this weather again. Understand?" "Understood," the boy nodded, thinking that after this experience he was unlikely to ever go into the water again. He studied the face of the man who had saved him from a terrible fate. Brown eyes, bushy dark eyebrows, emerging bald spots, and a thin scar stretching from the forehead to the upper lip. The scar, whitish against his tanned skin, was clearly visible.
I need to get going, the man said, obviously in a hurry. Take care. He then almost sprinted along the shore. Dale watched him until he disappeared behind the rows of market stalls. On the other side, his father was approaching, returning with hot dogs purchased from a cafe further from the shore. He had seen the stranger pulling Dale's limp body from the water. "What happened?" he asked, gripping Dale's shoulders and studying his face. Fear was evident in the man's eyes. He was on the verge of panic. I almost drowned," Dale sobbed and clung to his father. The man stroked his son's back and head, murmuring soothing words while trying to calm his hysterical son and find out what had happened. "I went in deep, then my leg cramped up, and I started to drown. Dad, I thought I was going to die. I thought I'd never see you again. But he saved me. He pulled me out of the water. Where did he go? Dad? I didn't even get a chance to thank him." "He ran off behind the tents," the father replied, scanning the surroundings. "I caught a glimpse of him." Once Dale regained his senses, he and his father set out to find the stranger who had given the boy a second chance at life. They roamed the nearby market, asking vendors about the man with the scar. Everyone shrugged, except a woman selling brightly coloured rubber rings, who pointed towards the village. "That's where he went, with a little girl on his shoulders." Undeterred, Dale and his father ventured to the village. However, no one there knew anything about the man with the scar. For the remainder of his vacation, Dale never swam in the sea again. He showed up on the beach daily, hoping to meet his rescuer, but the sea now terrified him. Even stepping into the water ankle-deep caused panic to set in, his heart to tighten, and his breathing to become laboured. After his ordeal, Dale began to appreciate life more. He started noticing the beauty of field flowers and the pleasing trills of birds. He realised how vibrant and fascinating the world is. The thought of losing it, all due to vanity and a desire to impress girls, was terrifying. He yearned to meet the man who had saved him from the water and offer a simple thank you, but the man never reappeared on the beach. The family returned to town, and preparations for the school year began. However, in September, Dale found that he couldn't train in the pool anymore. The water induced panic in him. He could no longer trust it and decided never to enter the pool again. At first, the coach scolded, then pleaded, and even begged. He didn't want to lose one of his most promising athletes, but it was in vain. Dale couldn't bring himself to enter the water. Even the familiar pool from his childhood now seemed dangerous and terrifying. He even stopped taking baths, only showers. He used to enjoy lounging in a tub filled with foam, finding it soothing and relaxing. But now it stirred unpleasant memories and caused hysteria. His parents, nearly losing him once, treated Dale with special care and didn't pressure him. That's when the vivid nightmares began. He could hear sounds, feel the cold sea waves, and even smell the sea in them. Over and over, he drowned, despaired, panicked, and awoke in a cold sweat. Haunted by nightmares of water, a boy chose not to worry his already anxious parents with his fears. Years later, this boy, now a mature man, lived independently in his own apartment, had a stable job as an economist for an oil company, and his salary was considered good by his city's standards. However, his dreams about water incidents still tormented him, less frequently, but just as vividly. And now, after another nightmare, Dale decided not to return to sleep. He was due to wake up in half an hour anyway. He stretched, got up and headed to the kitchen. His cat Tom appeared unexpectedly. Dale had found him as a pitiful wet kitten near a store in the rain. Unable to ignore its desperate cries, he took it home. The kitten, once frail and shabby, had grown into a handsome, well-fed cat. Dale made coffee, prepared a sandwich, and enjoyed a smoke by the open window. He appreciated the perks of bachelorhood, the freedom to live as he pleased. However, at 30, his parents were keen on having grandchildren. His sister Hope was already married. Dale was content with his life, a good job, his own apartment, his girlfriend Maura, and his cherished cat.
but he knew it was time to consider settling down, especially with Mora's regular hints. A decision seemed to be on the horizon. The cell phone gently vibrated. A message from Mora, light and breezy, wished good morning and reminded Dale that they were attending her friend's birthday party that day. Dale sighed. He didn't enjoy such events. Mora always seemed unnatural around her friends. She would hug him constantly, feigning excessive affection, and laugh uproaringly and playfully. However, they were a couple, and he had to respect her interests and desires. If the event was important to Mora, Dale would endure it. In the evening, Dale and Mora left the restaurant where the birthday was celebrated. Dale expressed a desire to leave early, feeling uncomfortable with the insincere, strained smiles. He was distinctly bored, unsure of how to occupy himself. Mora frowned unhappily and flirted overtly with other men. Surprisingly, Dale felt no jealousy. Now they were walking along the embankment. Mora grumbled, dissatisfied that they had left so early, while Dale, disregarding her complaints, admired the view. It was almost April, and twilight was setting in. The air was clear and fresh. Rare, thin, brittle ice floes floated along the river. Other people on the embankments also admired the river and relished the beautiful spring evening. "And yet I feel uncomfortable for you in front of people," Mora continued. She seemed oblivious to the surrounding beauty. "Did you sit all evening like a hermit? Didn't you even try to socialize? Is it that difficult to act normal?"
"This isn't my thing," Dale sighed.
How could he explain to Mora that the insincerity of her friends' smiles and their forced laughter made him feel down? Their discussions about the latest phone models and debates about whose car was cooler were merely annoying. It was as if there were no other conversation topics. How could Mora not see that?
"Take a look at the evening,"
Dale smiled, gesturing towards the embankment. "If we'd stayed there, we would have missed this wonderful sunset." "You're changing the topic again?" Mora frowned. "You always do that. The evening is just an evening, rather unpleasant and cold. I'm starting to feel chilly. Let's call a taxi. Your idea of taking a walk was foolish." "All right, a taxi it is," Dale agreed easily. How about we go to your place?" Mora's voice visibly softened, and a smile played on her face. Dale was aware that his girlfriend had been eagerly awaiting for a marriage proposal, or at least an invitation to move in together. He understood perfectly her expectations, but still was not ready to share his bachelor pad with her. Dating and spending time together were enough for him. At times, he felt guilty for keeping her waiting, especially after dating for such a long time. It seemed like they should be preparing for a wedding. Mora frequently dropped hints, which made it clear she was ready. Despite this, Dale continued to delay. He was trying to figure out whether he didn't want to marry at all, or if Mora was simply not the right person for him. Lately, he was leaning towards the latter. It baffled him how he hadn't noticed their differences before. The constant arguments over small things were becoming a routine. In the early stages of their relationship, these issues were non-existent. Mora supported him in everything, and it seemed as though they had similar views on life, but now she was increasingly disappointing him. But Dale was not eager to end the relationship, as there were many good aspects to it. He hoped this was just a rough phase, a crisis that would pass, and everything would return to normal. "Yes, let's go to my place." Dale smiled gently. Mora brightened up and linked her arm with his, while Dale wrapped his arm around her waist. Suddenly, Dale noticed something unusual on the bridge. Although there were few people due to the cold, a woman in a coat, trying to control a mischievous little girl, caught his attention. The child kept trying to reach through the bridge's railing. Dale sensed an impending tragedy. Mora was talking, but Dale was too focused on the situation unfolding on the bridge to listen. Why didn't the woman Simply pick up her daughter and move away from the edge. Didn't she see the danger? The girl was small and could easily fit through the bars. Then the unthinkable happened. The girl slipped from the woman's grasp, propelled towards the railing. The wide-set bars didn't stop her, and she tumbled into the water like a bright ball. Dale watched in horror, the moment seeming to happen in slow motion. The girl fell down into the icy water, and the air was pierced by a terrified, desperate scream from the woman. "What's wrong with her?" Maura asked, not having noticed what had transpired. "The child fell into the water," Dale replied. He was already sprinting towards the fence, separating the sidewalk from the shore, shedding his hat and down jacket along the way. Onlookers gathered on the bridge, some calling for rescuers or an ambulance. Dale knew he had to act fast. There was no one else to help her, except him. "What are you doing?" Maura tried to grip the sleeve of his sweater. "You can't swim! Stop! If you do this, you'll never see me again!" Maura shouted in desperation, hoping to dissuade him. But Dale kicked off his shoes and waded into the water. The cold rushed over his body, chilling, stiffening, terrifying. But he took a deep breath and plunged further into the icy water, now up to his chest. Fear resurfaced as memories from his childhood flashed before his eyes. The moment 12-year-old Dale nearly drowned. Panic threatened to take over, but he forcefully suppressed it. There was no time for fear now. Dale had hoped the river would be shallow, but just a few meters from the shore the river became too deep. Gathering his courage, he swam, feeling like a dolphin again. His body responded well, and the water no longer seemed dangerous or mysterious. He found himself wondering why he had avoided swimming for so long. Ice floes obstructed his path, slowing him down. They were cold, brittle and prickly. Thinking of how terrified the girl must be gave Dale the strength to push on. People were running along the shore, shouting directions and encouragement, but no one else dared to enter the water. In such conditions, only a professional swimmer could manage. The gap between Dale and the little girl was quickly closing. Even though his strength was dwindling, his limbs numbing from the cold, and his face oddly hot, he couldn't entertain the thought of failing. It was down to him. Soon he was close enough to reach the girl's red cap with its large pom-pom. He stretched out his arm, grabbing her shoulder. He expected her to cling to him, but she felt limp and lifeless. Fear surged within him. Was he too late? With one hand holding the child and the other paddling towards the shore, Dale moved towards the crowd at the water's edge. He felt the faint rise and fall of the girl's breath and exhaled in relief. It seemed she had just fainted. The shore was now close, almost within reach. Soon he would touch the bottom, and it would be easier. Much easier. He noticed the crowd on the shore becoming increasingly noisy, pointing to something on the right, and then, suddenly, his ears rang and bright spots danced before his eyes, increasing in number until darkness and silence overtook him. Dale opened his eyes to a blinding whiteness. He looked around, taking in the unfamiliar devices, blinking lights and the hum of machinery. Wires were connected to his head. Confused, he sat up, only to be overcome by dizziness and nausea. He quickly lay back down, feeling slightly better. He realized he was in a hospital. His last memory was of a shoreline and a girl collapsing in his arms. Concern for the girl overwhelmed him. Had she been rescued? But there was no one to ask. He was alone. Soon, a nurse entered the room. She approached him, apparently intending to change the IV drip.
"What happened?"
Dale asked. Was that his voice? So weak and shaky? "You're awake!" The nurse smiled broadly. "That's wonderful. I'll get the doctor right away."
"Wait,"
Dale said, holding her by the robe.
"Do you know what happened to the girl? She was drowning and I tried to save her."
"She's fine." The nurse's smile grew even wider, more welcoming. "The little girl wasn't hurt. And you You're a real hero." The woman left the room. Dale was alone again, now smiling. His actions hadn't been in vain. The child was safe. He could breathe again. But he had a new question. What had happened to him? The shore had been near. Why was he in such a state? Dale couldn't remember. A few minutes later, the doctor, a tall man with tired eyes and glasses, entered the room. He shook Dale's hand, calling him a hero. He then took a flashlight from his pocket and carefully shone it into Dale's eyes after lifting the patient's eyelids. "The swelling is going down. That's good," the doctor summarized. "And you, young man, are a real hero. You've even made the news. There are videos on the internet. News sites are all writing about you. We need to let the press know you've regained consciousness. They'll want to interview you, but that's for later, when you're stronger." Dale shuddered. He didn't like all the attention. "You're a swimmer, aren't you?" the doctor asked. "You jumped into the icy water without a second thought. The current was so strong."
"I used to swim a long time ago as a child."
"If it wasn't for you, that girl wouldn't have a chance. But don't worry, she's been taken to the children's hospital for a checkup. She has no injuries. You were less fortunate, but she had her second birthday that day."
"What about me?"
the man asked. You were unlucky. A heavy log carried by the current crashed into you near the shore. Despite people's attempts to warn you, it hit you. The blow landed on your head, but thankfully you were near the shore, and you and the girl were pulled ashore. The ambulance was already on its way due to the emergency call, so help arrived quickly. A large hematoma formed in your brain from the blow. An urgent, extensive and dangerous operation was necessary. The outcome of this intervention was unpredictable, but without surgery you wouldn't have survived. There were no predictions, admitted the doctor. But there is justice in the world. You've woken up. The whole hospital is celebrating. Everyone was very concerned about you. Everything will be fine now. However, the doctor was premature in his assurance. Dale didn't improve. He felt dizzy with the slightest movement. He wasn't transferred from the ICU to a regular ward due to his weakness and instability. The doctors did everything they could, but there was little improvement. Dale couldn't leave his bed, often felt nauseous, and frequently suffered from headaches. He spent most of his time in a semi-conscious state. He was plagued by reoccurring nightmares about drowning and the new ones where he couldn't save a girl. She kept slipping from his grasp and sinking to the bottom while he watched helplessly. It was terrifying. The doctor allowed Dale's family and friends to visit him, but ensured their visits were brief. Dale was very frail, and any unnecessary excitement could harm him. Dale's parents were the first to enter the ward. He was delighted to see them. His mother appeared tearful and worried, while his father maintained composure, but his eyes betrayed his anxiety. "We are proud of you," his father said, taking a seat on the edge of the bed.
"Why did you put yourself at risk like that?"
his mother sobbed, embracing her son.
"You could have died, especially since you haven't swum in so long. It's terrifying to think what could have happened."
"I had no other choice," Dale admitted. Yes, he was in a critical condition now, but he and the girl he saved were alive. That was what mattered. His friends also visited. They showed Dale internet clips about him, lifted his spirits and updated him on the news. However, Maura never visited him at the hospital. Dale didn't miss her, but he was curious. One morning, the doctor entered the intensive care unit with a beaming smile. "The latest examination results are promising," he informed Dale. "The new treatment is producing remarkable results. We're making progress." Dale smiled in response. He had been feeling better and could even sit up for a while. His recovery was progressing slowly but steadily. He felt better. Each passing day, his strength and energy returning. The improvement was undeniable. Eventually, he was allowed to stand. With the doctor's help, Dale walked to the window and back. He noticed spring was in full bloom. He wished he could go outside, breathe in the fresh air and stroll around the hospital square. A few days later, Dale was transferred to a general ward. His surroundings immediately felt more comfortable, simpler and friendlier. He had people to converse with, and he felt strong and healthier each day. On the first day, when visits without special permission were allowed, she came. "Go downstairs. There's a woman waiting for you," said the nurse who entered the room. Dale slowly descended the stairs, taking pleasure in his regained freedom. He expected to find Maura in the lobby. He had asked friends and family why she hadn't visited him, but they all sidestepped the question. Dale concluded that she was likely too afraid to see a loved one in intensive care, given her sensitivity and emotional nature. Now that he was in the general ward, he believed she would come to see him. However, the lobby was empty, except for a single woman. It wasn't Maura. This woman was slender, tall, with large eyes that conveyed both strength and fragility. Her long brown hair fell in waves down to her shoulders, catching the sunlight beautifully. Dale found himself admiring the stranger, her precise facial features and graceful movements reminiscent of the dancers in Degas's paintings, despite her merely sitting in a chair with no intention of dancing. Upon noticing Dale, the woman jumped up and rushed toward him. There was no doubt she had come to see him. "Good evening," Dale smiled. "Have we met before?" "How to say," began the woman, visibly embarrassed. "I know a lot about you, Dale, but you haven't met me yet. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Gladys." "Pleased to meet you," Dale responded, keeping a close eye on the woman. Her voice, movements, and demeanour all seemed charming, captivating, and oddly familiar. It was an odd but pleasant sensation. You saved my daughter. And me too." Suddenly it all made sense. This was the mother of the girl he'd saved. Dale found it difficult to look away from her large blue eyes, which contrasted beautifully with her coffee and milk skin. The realization that this beautiful woman had a daughter, and likely a husband, was disappointing and almost painful. "So, the girl on the bridge was your daughter?" he asked. "Yes," Gladys confirmed, nodding. "That was Sophie. She threw a tantrum right there on the bridge. I couldn't hold on to her. She broke free from my grasp, slipped, and fell down." Taking a deep breath, Gladys relived the horrifying moments that could have forever altered her life. Dale instinctively put his arm around her shoulders, offering comfort and support in her time of need. "What are you so worried about? It's all behind you now. Is your daughter okay now?" "She's fine," Gladys nodded, "and it's all thanks to you." "Where is she now?" "She's in the hospital." "What? In which hospital?" Dale was distressed. The man had spent over a month in the hospital, and although he was still recovering from his serious trauma, he had been told the girl was virtually unharmed. So why was she in the hospital for a second month? Was the truth still being kept from him to avoid causing worry? "No, Sophie is not in the hospital because of that incident," Gladys quickly assured him, noticing Dale's agitation. Or rather, not directly because of it. It wasn't the water that hurt her. "I don't understand," the man admitted. "I'll explain now. Our story is not a simple one." The 6-year-old Sophie was an unusual child. She was born healthy and strong. For the first year she developed like any other child, but then the relatives started noticing peculiarities about the little girl. She didn't show interest in people, fixated on the same objects and actions, and was frightened of sharp sounds. She preferred silence and solitude, while her peers were actively exploring the world. Instead, Sophie sat in the sandbox, filling and emptying a bucket of sand, over and over again. Sophie's tantrums began about 1.5 years ago. Any small thing could trigger her. It was unpredictable. Suddenly, Sophie would lose control, screaming frantically and writhing as if terrified. Finally, Gladys took her to a neurologist. The experienced doctor referred them to a specialised medical centre. There, Sophie was diagnosed with an incurable condition. The doctor warned that Sophie would never lead a typical life, and without rigorous rehabilitation, she might stop responding to the world entirely. Gladys had a hard time accepting the diagnosis. She cried at night, hoping for a mistake, but Sophie's behaviour continued to worsen. Gladys knew she had to pull herself together and focus on her daughter's treatment. "My parents have been very supportive, especially my father," Gladys admitted. "He takes on so much. He regularly takes Sophie to the dolphins. He says they help her. He also takes her to the racetrack. They spend a lot of time together. He definitely wouldn't have allowed that tantrum on the bridge." That evening, Gladys took her daughter for a walk along the embankment before bedtime. Such walks always helped the girl to sleep better. Everything was calm and nothing indicated any impending trouble. Thanks to regular rehabilitation, the little girl was more serene, with seizures becoming increasingly rare. But then, suddenly, a dog barked loudly. A large, white, clearly friendly dog being walked on a leash by a passer-by. The dog certainly meant no harm, merely wagging its tail enthusiastically to greet them, but its sudden loud bark startled the girl. Sophie quivered, her complexion paled and her face contorted. Gladys knew what was coming. She rushed to her daughter, holding her tight. The calm of the embankment was shattered by Sophie's piercing scream. She struggled in her mother's arms, tears streaming from her tightly shut eyes. Gladys tried to restrain her, but Sophie was not a 2-year-old anymore. She was growing, getting stronger, and during these episodes, her strength seemed to double or even triple. Gladys, being fragile, could not restrain her daughter, who broke free and ran towards the bridge railings. And what happened next? All Gladys could do was watch as her child fell from the embankment into the dark, cold waters below. "I would have jumped after her," Gladys began to explain. "I was almost ready. I ran to the fence, but someone held me back. I watched her being carried away by the current, and I was helpless. I can't even swim. My father tried to teach me many times, but it never worked out." Gladys screamed, pleading for someone to save her child, calling out for Sophie and for some reason, her dad. It felt like no one in the world could help them, but her father, who would have surely fixed everything and saved everyone as always, was not there. He and her mother were on their way to the other side of the country to visit relatives, and Gladys, left alone, was struggling to cope. She blamed herself for Sophie being in the cold water. It was her negligence as a mother. Gladys then resolved to jump into the water. No one would hold her back. How could she live without her daughter, and with this heavy burden of guilt on her soul? And then she saw a man on the bank shedding his clothes as he rushed toward the icy river. Sophie was relatively close to this man. There was hope, a real chance of a safe resolution. "I was mentally judging you then, cheering you on. You were my only hope. I was so grateful for your courage, for your disregard for your own safety. While others just watched, you rushed to my aid. And then this log on the shore. I went into the water with other men to pull you out of the water after you bumped into that unfortunate log. Luckily at that time, paramedics arrived. They quickly examined you, loaded you onto a stretcher, covered you with a thermal blanket and took to the hospital. Sophie and I were taken to the children's hospital. We spent a couple of days there while she underwent examinations. Thankfully everything turned out to be normal and they let us go. That's when I found out about your condition. It wasn't difficult to find out. It was a high-profile story. You were seriously ill after the surgery. There was a significant chance you could have been left disabled." "Really?" Dale was surprised. "They didn't tell me that." "I believe your parents requested that you not be told," Gladys replied with a smile. "I've gotten to know them quite well during this time. They're wonderful people. They mentioned that you almost drowned as a child. Since then, you never even dipped a foot in the water, and yet here you were, rushing to save a child." "It was an automatic reaction. Dale said, smiling in return. I can't even begin to tell you how relieved I am that the girl is all right. But you mentioned she was in the hospital. Sophie is a special child, Gladys sighed sadly. We try to protect her from stress and unnecessary worries. It's not good for her, and the incident certainly wasn't helpful. That's why she had to be hospitalized so unexpectedly. But she's doing much better now. Much better. That's good, Dale smiled. I'm glad to hear that. I don't even know how to thank you, Gladys admitted. You saved my daughter's life, and mine as well. I feel that anything I do won't be enough. Oh no, protested Dale. It was a natural act. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. Still, I do feel guilty about your condition. Do you need anything? Medication, a checkup, anything at all? I spoke to my father, and he, along with my mother, will be in town soon. We're all willing to help you in any way we can. I'm embarrassed by all this, Dale confessed. You should use the money for your daughter's treatment. You must be going through a hard time. I think I've repaid my debt. Dale felt as though the incident on the embankment was not an accident. He had spent his life feeling guilty for not thanking his saviour. Now, having saved a child himself, he felt a sense of closure. To alleviate Gladys's guilt, he shared his story with her. It turned out she already knew it from his parents. It seemed that they had been communicating with her frequently. Where is the girl's father? Dale dared to ask that had been bothering him for a while. Gladys frequently talked about her own father, but she never mentioned her husband. What kind of father is he? Gladys asked with a bitter grin. Sophie is only mine. I was once by the sea with my friends during my student days. We enjoyed the sun, beach and laughter. I had a fleeting resort romance with a fellow student. We didn't exchange contacts because we didn't plan to continue, and our feelings fizzled out by the end of the vacation. Back home I realized I was expecting a child, and I couldn't bear to give it up. That's how Sophie came into my life. Yes, I'm such a fool, Gladys smiled, but I don't regret anything. Even after learning about my daughter's diagnosis, I have not regretted it once. My parents are a great help. They love Sophie. To me, she is the meaning of life. The news that Gladys was unmarried unexpectedly pleased Dale. He immediately felt more confident. Oddly enough, he found himself wanting to see Gladys again, to talk to her. Her presence filled him with joy and energy. Visiting hours are over, the stern nurse announced. Can I come again? Gladys asked. I'll be waiting for you. Dale smiled, giving her palm a gentle squeeze. He couldn't stop thinking about his captivating visitor. Her beautiful face, delicate yet strong, resurfaced in his mind. Raising a challenging child alone was no small feat. He found himself wanting to please, protect, and defend Gladys. Oddly, Maura had never invoked such feelings in Dale. Even at the start of their relationship, Maura. She still hadn't shown up at the hospital and hadn't answered her phone. Friends and relatives remained silent, revealing nothing. Dale began to worry. Could they be hiding something? Had something happened to Maura? Nothing has happened to her, Kevin sneered as Dale's friend and colleague he had stopped by after work. So what's going on then? Why isn't she showing up or answering her phone? All right, I'll tell you. We've been trying to keep you out of this to avoid upsetting you, but I can see that you not knowing is causing you even more stress. Finally, someone understands. Your Maura is a traitor, concluded Kevin. And for the record, I've never particularly liked her. She's materialistic and insincere. Well, you be careful. Dale was displeased to hear these words about his girlfriend. Whatever you say, Kevin shrugged. After all, she left you, betrayed you, when she learned you might become disabled. I don't understand. You didn't know, but the doctors gave me a grim prognosis after the surgery. I didn't understand all the details, but the main point was you might end up in a wheelchair, with your lower body and an arm failing. Dale exhaled. He was almost glad he hadn't known about the looming danger. It spared him the anxiety and worry. And Maura, as soon as she heard about it, left immediately. She said she wasn't prepared to care for a disabled person. That's all there is to it. Well, we can't fault her for that. Dale shook his head. Did this news cause him pain? Perhaps not. It was difficult to expect any different from Maura. In fact, he felt a sense of relief. Maura would no longer be in his life. That was a good thing. Their relationship had been a burden on Dale, and he was tired of perpetually feeling guilty in front of her. She's already seeing someone else, quick to move on. Kevin's voice was tinged with resentment for his friend. She's out clubbing, always flaunting her fun times on social media. Let her be. I'm genuinely happy for her, Dale replied with a smile. So you're not even upset? Upset? I was facing potential paralysis, but now I'm walking, even running. How could I be upset? You're right, Kevin said, smiling broadly. Once you're discharged, we're going fishing. And this time you won't refuse. You swim better with us to the other side. I know you can swim. The internet is full of the videos of it from different angles. The whole city has seen. Gladys visited again. This time, Dale eagerly awaited her arrival. Spotting her familiar silhouette in the lobby, he couldn't suppress a joyous smile. They strolled around the hospital square, conversing. Gladys's parents were already en route. She was waiting. She missed him dearly and was exhausted from loneliness. How's your daughter? Dale asked. Now he was very much interested in Sophie's fate. He wanted everything to be well for this girl, that a long, happy life awaited her. She's getting better. She'll be discharged soon. Well, that's good to hear. I should be discharged in a week at most, according to the doctor. I'm tired of being confined within these four walls. Perhaps, could I have your phone number? Of course, Gladys said, clearly pleased. She gave Dale her number. I'll definitely call, he promised. Dale felt a certain warmth from Gladys, a feeling that she might like him too. It filled him with a light, sunny, warm sensation. Sophie's illness didn't scare him. He felt good with Gladys, and it was clear. Dale felt he was ready to move mountains for Gladys. Finally, he was discharged from the hospital. His doctor, while handing over the discharge papers, confessed surprise at the recovery. Just a month ago, he had had little hope for such a positive outcome. You're fully recovered and healthy, the doctor said in awe. Miracles do occur in our line of work, but your case is truly extraordinary. The injuries were so severe, and now it's as if nothing ever happened. There must be some higher justice at play here. You saved a child. Thank you for everything you've done for me, Dale gratefully responded. He witnessed and appreciated the doctor's and staff's efforts. Pulled from the other side of the world, he was now back on his feet. Surprisingly, he now has nearly 3 birthdays to celebrate. Coming home after a long absence felt like true happiness. Tom, his cat, rejoiced at his return, curling up on his lap. Friends had taken turns caring for Tom during Dale's absence. Dale savoured a warm shower, ordered pizza and started a movie. Today marked the last day of his sick leave. Tomorrow he would return to work and resume his regular life, making up for lost time. And in the evening, he would finally take Gladys out on a proper date. They planned to stroll around the city centre before heading to the movie theatre. After the movie, Dale intended to take Gladys to a restaurant. It was a classic, albeit unoriginal date. But the location didn't matter. What mattered was being with Gladys. Not in the hospital square, but in freedom. Not as a patient in the trauma ward, but as... what? Her other half? Her beloved? Dale smiled at the thought. Gladys arrived at the date, unexpectedly not alone. She was holding Sophie's hand tightly. There was no one to leave her with. She shrugged her shoulders guiltily. My parents have not yet returned, and the neighbour, the one who usually babysits, suddenly felt ill. I didn't even have an opportunity to warn you. Dale looked at the little girl he had once rescued. Sophie had big eyes and was pretty like her mother. 2 blonde pigtails stuck out from under a thin knitted cap. Sophie also regarded Dale with interest. It was doubtful she remembered him. However, Sophie suddenly smiled at Dale, broadly and sincerely. "Wow," Gladys marvelled. "She's usually afraid of strangers. I was even worried she'd become hysterical." As if to contradict her mother, Sophie suddenly extended her hand to Dale. He smiled and gently squeezed it. "Looks like we're going to be friends. Well, given this change of plans, how about we go to the ice cream cafe?" "I'll go anywhere with you," Gladys replied, blushing slightly. Dale beamed at her words. Dale, Gladys and little Sophie enjoyed a pleasant walk along the city streets. Sophie, walking hand in hand with the adults and occasionally riding on Dale's neck, completed their picture-perfect family. Although Sophie seldom spoke, Dale intuitively understood her needs. For instance, when she became tense at the sight of a pony carrying children, he steered them down a narrow alley to avoid it. "She's so calm and cheerful with you," Gladys noted, much to Dale's delight. They soon arrived at a wonderful playground, complete with slides, swings, sports equipment, fairy houses, and even a winding labyrinth. Despite the enticing array of amusements, Sophie clung tightly to Dale's hand, displaying little interest. Dale placed Sophie on a swing with a comfortable chair and gently pushed, and Sophie eventually began to move with the swing's rhythm, clearly enjoying herself. This allowed Dale a moment to converse privately with Gladys, a moment he had been eagerly anticipating. They sat on a bench hand in hand watching Sophie. "I'm sorry about this," the woman said, her gaze shifting towards her daughter. "I really wanted to spend this evening with only you." "It's okay," Dale replied. "I've longed to see you outside the hospital walls. This walk is wonderful." "Yes, it's a beautiful evening." "You know," Dale said, taking a chance to be candid, "I think I can't live without you. I think about you all the time. This has never happened to me before." Gladys smiled, her eyes sparkling with quiet joy. It was clear she was pleased by Dale's words. "Me too," she said, looking straight into his eyes. "I feel the same way. With you I feel calm, good, and so joyful. I don't know how to describe it." "That's great." Dale lightly wrapped his arm around Gladys's shoulders, but the shadow of sadness that darkened her beautiful face disconcerted him. I'm not entitled to all this." "What do you mean?" Dale asked, confused. Gladys had become tense, which disturbed him. He longed for their usual relaxed interaction. "I don't have the right to ruin your life. Sophie, she will never be like the others." "Don't even think like that. I love you, and we will get through this together. Please don't let such thoughts bother you any more," Dale confessed, his words flowing easily. He wished for Gladys to smile, perhaps even hug him, and stop worrying about what could potentially ruin his life. It wasn't like that at all. However, Gladys merely shook her head. Several weeks passed. Dale returned to work. His colleagues hailed him as a hero. First, it was due to the sensational story of rescuing a girl, and second, Dale had a lot of cases to handle that only he could manage. "You saved the child. Now, save us," the chief joked, handing Dale a stack of documents to process. "And prepare yourself. We're moving you to the planning department. You'll be leading it now." What a turnaround, Dale smiled. He had long awaited this position. It was interesting, and most importantly, it paid significantly more. "You deserve it," exclaimed Kevin, clapping Dale on the shoulder. Dale continued to see Gladys almost every evening. Her parents returned to the city, and Sophie often stayed with them now. But Dale found himself missing the girl, and would sometimes ask to take her for a walk. He enjoyed pleasing and surprising her. Seeing her smile meant a lot to him. He would always think of something interesting for her, such as visiting a husky kennel or a reserve with deer and roe deer. They also enjoyed forest walks. Although the little girl couldn't express her feelings in words, it was clear that she loved her saviour Dale with all her heart. One warm spring evening, Dale and Gladys were walking along the embankment. "You know, I first noticed you at this very spot," Dale suddenly recalled, "and you were over there on the bridge." "It's frightening to even think about that night," Gladys admitted. "But on the other hand, we never would have met otherwise." "I think we would have met anyway." Dale hugged Gladys tightly. "I would have found you for sure." "By the way, my parents, I've told them so much about you, they're eager to meet you. Do you mind?" "Why would I mind? Of course. I'm okay with it," Dale responded. "You see, even if we didn't have our relationship, my father would still want to meet you. You saved Sophie, his favourite. He's truly grateful to you. And my mother too. They want to thank you." "No need," Dale protested. "I was just returning a favour. I was once saved too. That man took a risk. There were sizable waves in the sea. But fate has already rewarded me. I've never felt this way about anyone before you. By the way, I take a vacation coming up in a month. I was thinking maybe we could go to the sea. You, me and Sophie." "Really?" Gladys's eyes lit up with joy. "But didn't you say you were afraid of the water?" "I guess after that incident my phobia disappeared. You know, I even enjoyed being in the water despite the circumstances. It's a pleasure I had forgotten." The meeting with Gladys's parents had to be postponed. Sophie fell ill, and Gladys couldn't spare any time these days either. Dale missed them. He bought toys and fruit for the girl and delivered the package to Gladys's house. Her parents were out visiting someone. That same evening, Dale received a call from Maura. He was surprised to see her name on the cell phone screen. He had thought she had forgotten about him. "Hi, how are you doing?" she asked, as if nothing had happened. "I'm doing fine," Dale replied. "I know it's good." Maura's voice suddenly turned respectful. "They say you're dating the mother of the girl you saved." "Yes," replied Dale briefly. "It's true. We are dating." "You were quick to forget me." Dale grimaced. Maura had left him during a difficult time while he was in the hospital, and now she was making claims. "It was you who left me first," he reminded the woman on the other end of the line. "You don't know anything. I have a lot to explain. Why don't we meet?" "Let's do it over the phone right now." "This is a delicate conversation. It's better to meet in person." "Well, okay. In an hour at our usual cafe." When Dale arrived there, Maura was already sitting at a table by the window. She looked wonderful. Light makeup, a dress that emphasized her figure. It was clear she had tried, but why? Did she want to win him back? That wouldn't be possible. "Hello," Dale greeted, taking a seat next to her. Maura smiled sweetly and openly at him. The grumpy, perpetually dissatisfied girl she had lately become was nowhere to be seen. "I understand everything. You thought I betrayed you. You thought I abandoned you in the hospital in serious condition." "To be honest, it did look that way." "That's exactly how it looked. I just needed to come to my senses. There's so much on my mind. You were in the hospital. You were injured right in front of me. It was horrible. I thought you were dead, and then I received the news." "What news?" "Well, the night we were walking along the promenade, and it all happened. I wanted to tell you that I'm expecting a baby." Dale recoiled from Maura. "A child? What child? That's impossible." His eyes darkened. "But you were drinking at your friend's birthday party. Why, if you knew it could harm the baby? If you were pregnant?" He didn't mean to say that. He was at a loss for words. He recalled that Maura was never without a glass of wine at the party. "I was just pretending, filling my glass with soda to avoid questions," she responded. And now what? Dale asked, still in shock. It's okay, Maura reassured him, placing a hand on her still flat stomach. I'm expecting a baby. Our baby. I think it's a boy. Why did you keep it a secret for so long? Dale asked, still reeling from the news. His life had been going so well, and now this was like a bolt from the blue. He thought of Gladys's likely disbelief. His heart clenched at the thought of telling her. At first I wasn't sure if you'd survive. Then they said you'd be disabled, Maura explained. I was scared. A child requires so much time and care, and if I also had to care for a disabled person, I didn't think I could handle it. That's why I kept quiet. I need to think about it, Dale said, standing up from the table. I'll give it some thought and then we'll decide what to do. I know you're seeing that girl, the mother of the girl you saved. Maura held up her hand. But there's a stranger's child there, and a sick one too, and here, he'll be ours. Our own. Do you understand? Healthy and dear. Do you understand? Maura, I need time, Dale repeated, removing her hand. I'll call you, I promise. I'll be waiting. Very much. After all, I love you. At home, Dale turned on the television for background noise and sank into the sofa. What a revelation. It had been easy to view Maura as a mercenary traitor who had left him in a tough spot. The problem had resolved itself and Dale's conscience was clear. But now this. He was going to have a child, his own. 6 months ago this news would have delighted him, but now his life was Gladys. How complicated everything had become. However, if Maura really was pregnant with his child, Dale would never abandon him. In the morning at work, Dale was quiet and moody. Naturally, Kevin noticed. By lunchtime, he walked into his friend's office. What's wrong? Kevin asked, taking a seat in the visitor's chair. Oh, nothing. The past just reared its head at an inconvenient time. Maura, is she... Kevin had always been particularly perceptive. Dale nodded. Send her away. She found out you'd been promoted, so she showed up right away. Maura has always been a mercenary and calculating person, but I hope you told her the position was taken. She knew it herself. What a weasel, Kevin grinned. I wish I'd seen her face when you blew her off. I didn't, sighed Dale. Maura is expecting a child from me. I don't know what to do about it. Wait a minute, Kevin quickly thought. Something doesn't add up with what I know about her. She was out clubbing and drinking while you were in the hospital. I even saw a picture on social media. That doesn't sound like the behaviour of a pregnant woman. I don't know. Maybe the stress was getting to her. Are you sure it's actually your baby? While the doctors were trying to save your life, she was dating someone else. Dale shrugged. How could he be even sure of anything? If it's your baby, the due date would be around 3 months. Maybe even a little more? Kevin continued to ponder aloud. I'd check it out if I were you. How? Go to an ultrasound together. They'll tell you exactly when it's due, and everything will be clear. Kevin's idea intrigued Dale. Going with Maura to the ultrasound could imply distrust, which might offend her. However, he called to his ex-girlfriend and arranged a meeting at a cafe near the medical centre, asking her to arrive at a specific time. He did not reveal the real reason for the meeting, suspecting that Maura would refuse and find numerous excuses to avoid the procedure. Dale arrived at the cafe well before the agreed time. Fortunately, it was not crowded, as he anticipated that Maura might cause a scene. She had always loved theatrics. Finally, Maura burst into the cafe, slender, beautiful, adorned in a light white dress. Her face split into the sweetest smile at the sight of Dale. Confident in her victory due to the undeniable argument of being pregnant with his child. However, Dale's mention of an ultrasound appointment in 15 minutes sent her into a fury. "I'm not going anywhere. I won't unnecessarily expose my baby to ultrasound. It's harmful. I'll end up with a sickly baby, like your new girlfriend." "An ultrasound is necessary at your stage of pregnancy," Dale gently countered. "I've researched. It's time for your first screening. Let's go together. We'll resolve all doubts at once." "But I refuse." "Is it that you don't trust me?" "I don't trust you," Dale admitted. "How can I trust you when you acted so strangely while I was in the hospital? But if we get the ultrasound and you're right, I'll be extremely embarrassed." "I won't go," Maura continued to resist. "It's downright humiliating. Why don't you trust me?" "Because we haven't spoken in so long. Then you suddenly appear and reveal this news, and I'm already seeing someone else. I have a right to know for sure. Don't you agree?" "Screw you," Maura retorted, throwing a glass of water in Dale's face. Dale was relieved he hadn't ordered coffee. "I'll raise the child without you." "If you have nothing to hide, prove to me what a scoundrel I am." From Maura's confused look, Dale had already surmised the truth. Naturally, Maura was not pregnant, but he needed solid proof to dispel all doubts. "There's nothing to prove," Maura suddenly hissed. Her plan had utterly failed. "You're not a sneak, but a fool. If we had been together, if we had married, I would have given you a healthy child and been an excellent wife. But you're stuck with that woman and her disabled daughter. Why would you want that kind of happiness? You must be a fool. So, there's no baby after all." "That's what I suspected." "You suspected correctly. Yes, there's no baby. I fabricated the whole story to prevent you from ruining your life. I wanted to save the fool. I thought you didn't know how to escape from these people. Such a splendid opportunity offered. And you—" "Maura," Dale said, his tone suddenly softening. The news that Maura was not pregnant was a relief. It removed any obstacles to Dale's relationship with Gladys. Everything else seemed insignificant. Dale felt neither anger nor irritation towards Maura. "What now?" The woman looked at him sternly and demandingly. "I'll manage my own life, okay? And you sort out yours." Dale left the cafe upbeat, feeling light and calm. He met Gladys in the evening. After a brief separation, their encounter was particularly joyful. Just being near her was pure happiness. It was time to decide. Dale couldn't bear the thought of parting with Gladys. He needed to see her daily and constantly feel her presence. Gladys, somewhat shyly, mentioned that her parents wanted to meet Dale and expected him to visit. "I tried to dissuade them, but my father insists." "Why did you try to dissuade them?" Dale didn't understand. "Well, it all seems too official." "Or something. What if you didn't want to?" "I'm just the opposite," Dale smiled. "I want to meet them. They should know the man who will soon take their daughter and granddaughter with him. Assuming the daughter and granddaughter don't mind, of course. Gladys, I love you. You know that. I think it's time we got married. And I plan to adopt Sophie. Do you have any objections?" "Me?" Gladys looked at Dale with wide eyes, a happy smile appearing on her face. "Of course not." "A proposal is probably done differently. I'm not sure. I'm not good at this sort of thing, but I'll make it right later. There will be a restaurant and a ring. I just wanted to know your thoughts sooner rather than later." Before meeting Gladys's parents, Dale was nervous. He prepared, bought a bouquet for the mother of his beloved, and chose a bottle of good cognac for her father. Of course, he didn't forget about Sophie. He always surprised her. This time he found a funny cat from the girl's favourite cartoon in the store. At the designated time, Dale stood outside the apartment door, hesitant to ring the bell. What if Gladys's parents didn't accept him? What if they didn't like him? However, upon seeing Gladys's mother's joyful face, he calmed down. The elder woman, with eyes resembling her daughter's, greeted him with a welcoming smile. "You must be Dale," she asked. "Gladys has been telling me all about you. You're exactly how I pictured." At that moment, Gladys and Sophie appeared. Both joyfully rushed to the guest and embraced him. Dale was led into the drawing room, where the table had already been set. "Where is the head of the family?" Dale inquired. "He was urgently called to work. He'll be here soon," Gladys responded. Gladys's mother shared amusing stories from her daughter's childhood. The conversation flowed naturally. Dale observed that Gladys's parents were much older than his own. Their only child was born late. Logically, Gladys should have been a spoiled princess, but that was not the case. Finally, a tall, elderly man entered the living room. Sophie immediately ran to him. The man picked up his granddaughter with ease, kissed her, and then extended his hand to Dale. Dale couldn't take his eyes off the man's face. Dark skin, broad dark eyebrows, attentive brown eyes, and a scar. A thin, whitish scar running from his forehead to his upper lip. It was him, the man who had saved him from drowning years ago. The man he had been too stunned to thank. He had aged, but the scar was unmistakably the same. As soon as Dale was alone with Gladys's father, he followed him outside for a smoke. "I don't know how to thank you for granddaughter," Gladys's father said as he lit a cigarette. "Our whole life is in her. You showed courage. You didn't fear the cold water, the ice floes, or the current. I owe you one. I'll do anything for you. Just ask." "Actually, I was repaying a debt for you," Dale replied. "Do you remember vacationing 18 years ago near the sea?" "Yes, I do." The older man nodded, studying Dale's face. "And you saved a teenager who foolishly swam into a light storm far from shore?" "Yes, something like that happened. How do you know?" "So, it was you," Dale exclaimed. "I recognize that scar. I was that boy. I've regretted all these years that I never got the chance to thank you. My father and I tried to find you later, but we couldn't. We went home that same night. I had come to say goodbye to the sea with my daughter, but then I noticed you. I left her on the shore to help you. That incident entirely changed my life. You disappeared immediately and I was desperate to find you. Now look at us, reunited after all these years." "I rushed back to Gladys," the man confessed. "She was alone on the shore. I feared someone might take her, or that she might go into the water without me. She was tiny, just like Sophie is now. She came late in our life, you noticed, didn't you?" Dale nodded. "We had a son, handsome and smart. He wasn't born early. He was returning from the army when he was attacked on a train, robbed and thrown out while it sped along. He didn't survive. My wife and I thought our lives were over. But then Gladys was born, and she brought us back to life. And then came Sophie. They're everything to us." "I understand. I'll protect them and take good care of them." "I trust you, lad." Gladys's father clapped Dale on the shoulder amiably, then added, "If I hadn't saved you, a teenager, from the water that day, no one would have been there to save my Sophie. God works in mysterious ways." Mary Beth spent a long time in front of the bathroom mirror, examining her reflection. She felt that she looked much older than the last time she had scrutinized herself so closely. The wrinkles around her eyes had deepened. Her nasolabial folds were longer and more pronounced, and grey was starting to show at her temples. My God, how terrible, Mary Beth muttered, pulling her face away. She was shocked at how much she had aged. She wasn't even 40 yet. Only 38, but she looked 7 to 10 years older, according to her mirror reflection. Mum, hurry up! Cheryl needs to use the bathroom. A knock on the door snapped Mary Beth back to reality. It was 8 a.m. and they needed to leave the house at 8:40. Quickly she brushed her teeth, rinsed her face, applied cream, and lamented that she didn't have time for a facial mask. I never have enough time for myself, Mary Beth thought angrily as she exited the bathroom. Her children, 16-year-old Stacy, 10-year-old Zachary and 5-year-old Cheryl, were lined up in the hallway. You'd spend 100 more years in there, Stacy said rudely, nudging her mother aside and entering the bathroom, pulling her younger sister Cheryl by the hand. Cheryl, let's hurry up or we'll be late for school. You can thank your mother for this. Thank you? Squeaked Cheryl, who seemed unclear about why she was thanking her mother, whether for the potential tardiness or for finally vacating the bathroom. Mary Beth sighed heavily. Every day communicating with Stacy became increasingly burdensome. Her older teenage daughter had become disrespectful, disregarded Mary Beth's opinions, and was always irritated when Mary Beth voiced her perspective. What would you know about it? The eldest daughter used to retort, pulling a disgruntled face. My dear, I'm not 100 years old yet, and I haven't been 16 years old for a long time. Mary Beth tried to reason with Stacy, even though she could clearly see that her words had no effect. Stacy only rolled her eyes and made noises of disapproval, making it abundantly clear that she considered her mother's opinions to be of little importance in their household. You may not be 100 years old, but you certainly don't look 38. Stacy was insensitive. Have you looked at yourself in the mirror lately? You look like an old woman. You've neglected yourself. You don't dye your hair. You don't do manicures. You don't even know how to use makeup. Have you seen Katie Lenahan's mum? She's beautiful. She's 42, and she looks like she's not even 30. Mary Beth remained silent. Though she wanted to rebuke Stacy about Katie Lenahan's mother, she had a wealthy husband who allowed her not to work and spend her days in beauty salons and malls. She also had her own driver, cook and housekeeper. Everything was in place for Katie's mum to maintain her appearance. Stacy, you know I can't afford beauty parlours and masseurs. Mary Beth tried to explain, though she felt embarrassed. I'm on my own. We also have our granny who needs care and medication. It's not my fault that I don't have a wealthy husband who can afford all my beauty treatments. Stacy glanced at her mother and set aside a sandwich she'd been about to bite into, changing her mind for some reason. Are you serious now? Scoffed the eldest daughter. Who's to blame for us living like beggars? For you working as a simple receptionist in a third-rate hotel, and for the 4 of us living in 40 square meters. I've seen pictures of you when you were young. You were beautiful. Why didn't you marry a decent man? Where's my father? Someone like Katie Lenahan's dad. Why are you silent, Mum? Mary Beth felt the urge to fling the cooled tea in her cup at her daughter, but as a mother of 3, she had long since learned the rule of counting to 10. If she ever felt the impulse to do something rash that could lead to drama and trouble, she'd simply count to 10 in her mind. By the time she finished, her nerves would have calmed and the urge to act impulsively would have faded. The rule always worked, just like it did this time. You shouldn't talk about your father in such a way, Mary Beth said slowly, enunciating each word as she twirled the cup with the remaining tea in her hands. You know, your father Scott passed away 3 years ago. Scott wasn't my father, Stacy retorted sharply, forcing her mother to apply the rule of 10 again. Just because I was 5 when you and he met and started your lives together doesn't mean I don't have other memories. Scott was the father of Cheryl and Zachary, not me. So don't associate me with something that doesn't concern me. Mary Beth sighed, realizing arguing with her daughter was futile. Every day, Stacy grew older, becoming more insolent, rude, and arrogant. Previously, such traits were absent in her. Mary Beth saw in Stacy an uncanny resemblance to Anna, her paternal grandmother, the one who had never met her granddaughter. Strangely, but with each passing year, Stacy mirrored Anna more closely, leading Mary Beth to fear that her daughter might become the monster that her grandmother had been. Scott raised you from the age of 5, and for 8 years he treated you as his own daughter, Mary Beth said. That's his problem, Stacy retorted defiantly. I never saw him as my father, never called him Dad, and he knew it all along. Mum, why do you keep insisting that Scott is my father? We both know that isn't true. Because we were a family, Mary Beth tried to explain. Don't be ridiculous. Stacy laughed dismissively. What kind of family? He betrayed you, and you overlooked it. We were never a family. Mary Beth felt a wave of anger. Each sentence spoken by her eldest daughter felt like a blow. It was as if Stacy was intentionally using her words to inflict pain on her mother, seemingly deriving pleasure from the humiliation. Mary Beth couldn't believe the words she was hearing from her own child, her beloved daughter, whose life she had fought so hard for. Arguing with Stacy was futile. At 16, Stacy was convinced she knew more about life than her mother. She saw Mary Beth as a failure, a woman who had achieved nothing. Mary Beth was a mother of 3, single, working a lowly job, caring for a sick mother-in-law. To Stacy, her mother held no authority. Every word Mary Beth spoke was met with resistance and often led to insults or heated arguments. The morning unfolded as usual. By the time Stacy and her younger sister Cheryl emerged from the bathroom, Mary Beth had already prepared breakfast, setting 3 bowls of porridge, sliced bread, and warm milk on the table. Ugh, warm milk again? Stacy complained, pushing the glass away. Her younger sister followed suit, leaving only Zachary to enjoy his porridge, bread and milk. It's not warm, it's from the refrigerator, Mary Beth replied in a voice that brooked no objection. Stacy's defiant behaviour was beginning to annoy her, especially as she displayed it in front of her younger sister. Cheryl adored Stacy, and Mary Beth feared that her younger daughter would see Stacy as a role model. In some aspects, Stacy could be a good example, but certainly not in her attitude and manner of speaking to her mother. The porridge is all sticky, Stacy objected. Cooking is obviously not your thing. Mary Beth clenched her teeth and then suddenly decided she had had enough of her eldest daughter's complaints. Silently, she moved to the table and took the plate of porridge and glass of milk away from the table. Stacy's face showed surprise. Are you going to leave me without breakfast? She asked sarcastically. Mary Beth looked at her daughter quizzically. And what should I do? Shall I cook a separate dish for you, while everyone else quietly eats their porridge and risks being late for school? If you cooked properly, you wouldn't have to waste time and products, Stacy snapped. If you're not happy with my cooking, then get up earlier and cook yourself. Set the alarm for 6 a.m. and then prepare us all a meal. Why are you looking at me like that? Are you surprised by my suggestion? Stacy abruptly left the table and disappeared into another room. Cheryl, who had been silently watching the conflict between her mother and older sister, idly stirred her spoon in her dish, managing to swallow only a spoonful of porridge. Annoyed with her eldest daughter, Mary Beth took the plate from Cheryl, tossed it into the sink with a clatter, and issued commands. "Get ready, we're leaving. Cheryl, you'll eat in the kindergarten. And Zachary, stop eating so much bread. You're on your third piece. Your pants will soon burst." Zachary glanced grudgingly at his mother but continued to chew. Mary Beth watched the children with a weary look, then leaned against the refrigerator and closed her eyes. It was only 8:30 in the morning, and she was already tired and drained. She wondered where she would find the strength to work for 10 hours, then go grocery shopping, prepare dinner, help Zachary with his homework, put Cheryl to bed, and prepare for another challenging day. The four of them stepped outside. It took Mary Beth about 5 minutes to warm up the car before they drove away from the house. "Drop me off at the corner," Stacy requested, to which Mary Beth, her mother, responded in surprise. "Why? Do you want to go to the store?" Stacy shook her head. "I don't want my classmates to see the kind of car we drive." "Our car is fine," Zachary countered from the back seat. Mary Beth gave a small smile at her son through the rearview mirror. "It's not a car, it's a piece of junk. If you enjoy driving it, it doesn't mean that I like it too. Unlike you, I don't want to look like a beggar," Stacy retorted. Mary Beth gripped the steering wheel tighter, silently counting to 10. Stacy was becoming increasingly difficult to handle. When did she become so bitter? "I don't look like a beggar," Zachary said, looking hurt. Mary Beth glanced at her son in the mirror and winked at him. "Of course not. You're a good boy," she said to her son. She then noticed the sarcastic grin on her eldest daughter Stacy's face. "Did you say that to all your men? Did you think they were smart, while they acted to you like the last lowlifes?" Stacy asked. Mary Beth sharply pressed the brake, slowing the car. She turned her head towards Stacy, her eyes blazing with anger. "Did you say that on purpose?" "Get out of the car!" "What? Get out where?" Stacy's eyes widened in surprise. "You're only 20 meters away from the bus stop. Take the bus to school. I can't stand to see or hear you any longer. You've exhausted me so much this morning, I can't bear to be near you." "You're going to throw me out into the cold just because you can't handle the truth?" Stacy's voice quivered with outrage. "The truth? Who says you're telling the truth? Who made you the arbiter of truth?" "Oh, to hell with you!" Stacy shouted, then grabbed her school backpack and stormed out of the car, slamming the door loudly behind her. Mary Beth glanced back and saw her youngest daughter's eyes filled with confusion and tears. "Cheryl, why are you crying?" Mary Beth attempted to smile, but it came out forced and unnatural. "Don't worry, everything's fine." "Why did you kick Stacy out?" Cheryl asked, her lower lip trembling. Mary Beth felt nauseous at the sight of her younger daughter's upset state. She was tired of tolerating Stacy's antics. She had neither the strength nor the desire to put up with it any longer. How much longer could she allow Stacy to speak to her in such a tone? Mary Beth, burdened by the constant problems of everyday life, lack of money and past mistakes, felt completely drained. She had no one to confide in about her life and her relationship with her daughter. Her friends were all more or less settled. Her mother had passed away long ago, her sister lived in another city, and their phone calls were like dry life updates. "Cheryl, I didn't kick Stacy out. She decided to take the bus herself," Mary Beth replied, trying to keep her voice soft. She didn't want her youngest daughter to turn out like her eldest. If that happened, Mary Beth would consider herself a real failure for not being able to raise her children to be decent human beings. "You yelled at her, and it's cold outside," Cheryl retorted, sniffling her nose. It's Stacy who yells at Mum all the time, Zachary interjected. Mary Beth looked gratefully at her son. Despite her difficulties with her oldest daughter, her son was wonderful. Mary Beth glanced at the clock and gasped. She was running out of time. She needed to drop the kids off at kindergarten and school, and then commute to her job in the city centre. Finally fulfilling all her morning duties, Mary Beth rushed into the hotel just in time to reach the reception desk. "You're cutting it close," her co-worker exclaimed. "It's almost 9. Do you want to get fired?" Mary Beth shook her head, catching her breath and untying the scarf around her neck. Their boss despised tardiness and other breaches of work ethics, and her primary threat was instant dismissal or disciplinary action, which invariably impacted the monthly bonus. Given Mary Beth's financial situation heavily depended on this bonus, she made every attempt to avoid disciplinary action. "I had to find a parking lot," Mary Beth attempted to justify herself. After changing her clothes and taking her place at the reception desk, their megalomaniac boss appeared at the entrance. She glanced at Mary Beth and her partner Cara, then at her watch, and gave a nod of greeting. Both women breathed a sigh of relief. Cara then left for home, while Mary Beth, who had just arrived at work 10 minutes ago, looked at her back enviously. She too wished to go home, clean up, make a proper lunch and dinner, do the laundry, and relax in front of the TV with chips and juice. But instead, a long shift lay ahead, followed by a rushed trip home, grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning, arguments with Stacy, and the struggle to maintain self-control. After work, Mary Beth, as planned, stopped at the supermarket for groceries and then headed home. It was almost 10 p.m. To Mary Beth's surprise, only Zachary and Cheryl were home. "Where's Stacy?" Mary Beth asked while unpacking the groceries. "Mum, what's for dinner?" Zachary impatiently inquired, always hungry and eager to eat. Mary Beth tried to think of something quick and easy to prepare for dinner, but her thoughts kept drifting back to her eldest daughter. "Zachary, where's Stacy? Is she out for a walk?" The son shrugged. "I don't know. She brought Cheryl home from the kindergarten, then grabbed a bag and left." "A bag?" Mary Beth stopped in her tracks. Why would she need it? What kind of bag? "The brown one she usually takes to the gym." Mary Beth glanced at the clock. 20 minutes to 11. Where could her eldest daughter have gone with her gym bag, which was quite roomy? "Zachary, what did she say?" "She didn't say anything to me," muttered the son, "as if Stacy ever told me anything." Mary Beth grabbed her phone and dialed her daughter's number. Despite the long rings, Stacy didn't pick up. Furious and cursing under her breath, Mary Beth was ready to break her rule of 10 and give her daughter a piece of her mind once she came home. The rule was that by 10 p.m. Stacy had to be home. If she was going to be late, she needed to inform her mother. But Stacy hadn't sent any messages, leaving Mary Beth to worry and seethe in frustration. After several unsuccessful attempts to reach her daughter, Mary Beth began to panic. The first snow was falling outside, and Stacy was out in her sneakers and coat, probably trying to prove a point to her mother. What an ungrateful child, Mary Beth thought to herself as she prepared dinner, regretting her morning outburst. She should have kept her cool. After all, she knew what Stacy was like. At the start of the 12th hour, after putting Cheryl to bed, Mary Beth continued to call her eldest daughter Stacy. She was inwardly terrified by her thoughts, which painted the most horrifying scenarios. What if Stacy had been kidnapped, had fallen into bad company, or even worse, had used something harmful? What if she was in danger, somewhere unknown and in a dreadful condition? Just as Mary Beth was about to call the police, a message arrived at her phone from Stacy. "Don't look for me. I'm at a friend's house." The message was brief and vague. Which friend's house? For how long? Was Stacy even planning to return home? And when? Mary Beth was left to wonder. She called her daughter again, but the answer was silence. "What friend? Why aren't you coming home?" Mary Beth texted her. "I'm sick of dealing with you and the life we live. Pick Cheryl up from the kindergarten tomorrow and sort out your own problems." Stacy's response was full of anger and resentment. She had always been discontent with their lifestyle. In her eyes, her friends had much more than what Mary Beth could provide. Despite Mary Beth's best efforts, Stacy was always unhappy with what she had, or, more accurately, with what she didn't have. A new phone, trips to the sea, a father, a separate room, beautiful things. Things she saw at her friends and on the internet. In the solitude of the bathroom, Mary Beth wept uncontrollably. Despite her best efforts to be a good mother, unlike her own, she felt she had failed. Her daughter Stacy despised her, viewing her as a failure and a non-achiever. There were no normal men on Mary Beth's path. They were either married men or drunken loafers seeking an ego boost. Who would want a woman nearing 40 with 3 children? Exiting the bathroom, Mary Beth bumped into Zachary, who was surprisingly awake and wandering the hallway. "Why aren't you asleep?" Mary Beth asked, concern evident in her voice. "You've been crying, haven't you?" Zachary observed, worry filling his gaze. Mary Beth suddenly realized that her tear-streaked face was a clear giveaway. "Go to bed, Zachary." She gently stroked his head, but he abruptly pulled away and scrutinized her. "You cried because of Stacy, didn't you?" he asked. Mary Beth merely nodded and sighed heavily. Even a 10-year-old could sense the tension between her and her eldest daughter. "I'm worried about her," Mary Beth admitted. Zachary abruptly walked over to his mother and hugged her tightly. "Mum, don't cry because of Stacy. She's just mean," Zachary said. Mary Beth only managed a sad smile, holding her son close. "She's just jealous of everyone. That's why she's so mean." "She's not mean. She just lacks what others have." Zachary pulled away from Mary Beth and shook his head. "No, Mum. She has everything. What doesn't she have? She has a house, food, you, me, Cheryl. What else does she need? A new smartphone?" "Probably," Mary Beth said, grinning, "though I don't have the money to buy her one." "Then let her go out and earn it herself," Zachary said, resentment in his voice. "You don't need to buy her expensive cell phone." "Let her work and earn it. She said about Katie Lenehan that her mother made her work so she could buy what she wanted." Mary Beth looked at her son in surprise. "Katie? Working? And where does she work?" "She hands out advertisements in a shopping centre. She also works for her father's firm, doing something with documents. He pays her for it, while Stacy thinks you should buy her everything for free. It's not fair." "Do you know where she is now?" Mary Beth asked, hope evident in her voice. "I do not know. Maybe at her boyfriend's," Zachary replied. Mary Beth looked surprised. "Boyfriend? Stacy has a boyfriend?" Zachary nodded. "Stacy thinks I'm clueless, that I'm stupid. But I saw her with a guy from the graduating class. They were hugging. She thinks she's very mature. That's why she's talking to you like that. She thinks we're all stupid, even Cheryl. But that's not fair. We're not silly." "No, of course not," Mary Beth replied, her worry increasing. She never suspected her eldest daughter had a boyfriend. Maybe Zachary misunderstood, or assumed Stacy had a boyfriend just because he saw her hugging someone. It didn't necessarily mean that Stacy was seriously involved with a boy. Mary Beth had a restless night, tossing and turning until morning. She woke up feeling drained, as if she hadn't slept at all. After washing her face, she prepared breakfast for her children, dropped them off at kindergarten and school, and couldn't stop thinking about her eldest daughter. If she could turn back time, Mary Beth would do everything possible to ensure her daughter wasn't so resentful, overly independent, and superior to others. "What's wrong?" her partner asked when he saw Mary Beth at the reception desk that morning. "You look like you've been run over by a tractor." "To be honest, I feel the same way," Mary Beth replied. Seeing her reflection in the hotel lobby mirror, she was taken aback. Dark circles under her eyes, deeper wrinkles, and dishevelled hair were visible, all because a 16-year-old girl thought she was too old. "Why don't you take a sick day? Our boss would be furious if she saw you like this." "I'll have a coffee and I'll be fine," Mary Beth said. But the coffee didn't help. Waves of fatigue washed over her, and her eyes felt heavy. Mary Beth yawned continuously, looking at the clock, hoping the hands would move faster and end her grueling workday. Mary Beth knew she needed to contact Stacy's teacher to check if her eldest daughter had attended school. However, her manager strictly prohibited phone usage during work hours. She was afraid to take the risk, knowing that any violation could lead to disciplinary action and potentially a loss of her bonus. "What's going on with you today?" her supervisor asked when Mary Beth yawned widely, thinking no one could see her. Quickly covering her mouth, Mary Beth felt her face drain of colour. "I'm sorry, Francesca," Mary Beth apologized, trying to gauge from her boss's face whether she would lose her bonus or be fired for a simple yawn at work. "I'm just tired." "You're not even 40, to be tired in the middle of the day," the woman replied sternly. "Are you aware that the guest from room 305 still hasn't checked out, though it's already 2 o'clock in the afternoon?" Mary Beth felt a chill. Indeed, it was already past 2, and she had forgotten about the problem guest that Kara had warned her about in the morning. He had arrived at the hotel drunk the previous night, and it was clear he was going to be trouble. "Sorry, Francesca, I'll fix it right away," Mary Beth assured her. "Of course you will," the boss retorted, glaring at Mary Beth with a disgruntled expression. "And if I hadn't reminded you about him, what would have happened? He would have overslept and left without paying for another night. I'm not pleased with your performance lately. Pull yourself together, or I'll recommend your dismissal." Mary Beth couldn't let that happen. Becoming unemployed with 3 children and a sick mother-in-law was unthinkable. Finding a decent job with a stable and fair income was challenging in their small town. Mary Beth hurried to room 305. After much difficulty, she managed to wake the sleeping guest. She then spent another hour explaining that he needed to pay for an extra night. "No way," he argued, shaking his head. "It's not my fault no one woke me up. That's your problem, not mine. I won't pay." Upon learning that the guest had checked out almost at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, without agreeing to pay for the extra day, Francesca was furious. Mary Beth sobbed as she listened to her boss's harsh words, who had decided to deduct the cost of the extra day from Mary Beth's salary. "But it's too large a sum," Mary Beth calculated in her mind, realizing that it was almost the cost of her shift. "He was only 3 hours late. The new guest hasn't arrived yet, and the room will be cleaned by the time he does. Let me just pay for these 3 hours, please." "No," Francesca retorted. "I'm not doing this because I'm nasty. I'm doing it to make you take your job responsibilities more seriously. After your shift, come to me and sign up a request for a deduction from your paycheck." Mary Beth couldn't bear it, breaking into tears in front of her boss. But where was the justice?
Why did everything seem so unbearably heavy today? With her daughter, the problems at work, and her mental state. Where could she find the strength to bear all these burdens without losing hope? That evening, Stacy didn't return home again, but she picked up her younger sister from kindergarten. Cheryl couldn't provide any details about Stacy, neither where she'd been, how she looked, nor her mood. Zachary informed her mother that Stacy had taken more of her belongings, which indicated one thing: the stubborn girl had no plans to return home. Mary Beth spent all evening trying to reach her daughter, but she stubbornly refused to answer the phone. In desperation, Mary Beth went to her daughter's school the next morning to speak with her teacher and catch a glimpse of her. "Stacy hasn't been to school for 3 days now," the teacher said, dismayed. "I thought she was sick." Mary Beth was stunned. It turned out that Stacy had not only withdrawn from her family, but also from her studies. "Mrs. Walsh, do you know where your daughter is?" asked the teacher, and Mary Beth, unable to answer, broke down in tears. "She's left home," Mary Beth managed to say, sobbing and sniffling, accepting a tissue from the teacher. "We're having a difficult time at home. Stacy is out of control." "I'll need to inform the principal," the teacher said, but Mary Beth looked at her with a pleading expression. "Please don't say anything. I will find my daughter. I will do everything to make her see reason. I beg you, help me." The teacher softened. "All right, but you need to resolve this with your daughter by the end of the week. If the school discovers that I knew about your family issues and I didn't report them, I could be in trouble too." Mary Beth nodded, her mind racing about what to do next. Where should she go? What should she do? She picked up her phone and texted her daughter. "If you don't show up at school tomorrow, the child welfare authorities may take you away. Is that what you want?" A few minutes later, her daughter replied, "I will go to school, but only to avoid being sent back to you by child welfare." She capitalized the word "you" to emphasize that she left home because of her mum. Then, on break, Mary Beth came up to Stacy's friend Katie and asked her, "Do you know where Stacy is?" But the girl waved her off. "Mrs. Walsh, stop interrogating me. Solve your daughter's problems on your own and leave me out of it." "I won't bother you," Mary Beth promised, desperate to learn the truth about her eldest daughter's life. "Just tell me where she lives. I won't go there, but I'll be at peace, knowing. Can't you understand what it's like to lose a child?" "You didn't lose Stacy," Katie shrugged. "She left you willingly, and honestly, I understand why. You've been hard on her with your instructions." "Me?" Mary Beth asked, taken aback. "What did she tell you? Katie, don't keep quiet." "Sorry, Mrs. Walsh. My next class is about to start. And, for the record, Stacy isn't living with me, so don't look for her at my place. She isn't living with any girl either." Mary Beth leaned tiredly against the cool wall and closed her eyes. Her daughter, 16 years old, apparently thinks she's too old. She's living with some guy who's bound to turn out to be a scumbag. What was going on in Stacy's head? What was she doing? What was she thinking? Mary Beth was left wondering about Stacy's thoughts and actions. At that moment, she received a call from her mother-in-law's nurse. The caregiver worked at the woman's house on Mary Beth's workdays. Today was Mary Beth's day off, and she was expected to cover for the caregiver. Between school and concern for Stacy, Mary Beth had lost track of time. "Holly, I'm on my way!" Mary Beth nearly shouted into the phone. "Please, be patient for about 40 minutes. I'll stop by the pharmacy and then I'll be there." "Mrs. Walsh," the woman's voice was reproachful. "We had an agreement. I have my own plans and things to do."
Mary Beth sighed. As if problems with her work and daughter weren't enough, she now had to deal with the caregiver's displeasure. Mary Beth valued Holly very much for cooking, cleaning, treating bed sores, administering injections, and even partially rehabilitating Mary Beth's mother-in-law, who had suffered a stroke 2 years prior, resulting in the complete loss of sensation in her legs. Holly waited for Mary Beth in the hallway, ready to dash off for her own errands.
"Mrs. Walsh, please don't do that again."
Mary Beth apologised, handing the caregiver the money, and moved into the room where her mother-in-law lay. The entire house bore the scent of illness and medication. Being in this apartment was always a mental challenge for Mary Beth. Sarah was in bed, flipping through a book. On seeing Mary Beth, she gave a weak smile.
"Hello, daughter."
"Hello, Sarah. How are you feeling?"
"My dear, nothing has changed in the 2 days you've been gone."
Sarah's speech had almost fully recovered from her stroke, but her legs had not. The stroke had paralysed her lower body, rendering her unable to stand, move, use the bathroom, bathe without help, and generally confined her to her bed. Holly, who Mary Beth found after an extensive search among other caregivers, was the only one willing to work for not much money. She would arrive in the morning and in the evening, but was always ready to return if Sarah needed help, as she lived just 2 houses away. Mary Beth made her mother-in-law's bed and assisted her to the bathroom, where Sarah washed herself on her own. Afterward, they settled in the kitchen for tea. Sarah could move around the house in a wheelchair, but the room's dimensions and inconvenient doorways made it impossible for her to change room by herself. When either Holly or Mary Beth was present, they would transfer her into an armchair and move her around the apartment. However, the outdoor walks were still problematic. The building was not equipped with ramps, an elevator, and Sarah lived on the 3rd floor. So her time outdoors was limited to reading or people watching from the balcony, while seated in her wheelchair. "It's so good when you come," said the mother-in-law cheerfully to Mary Beth, who returned a weary smile.
"Holly tries, but she's still a stranger to me, and doesn't treat my care as reverently as you do."
"Holly is just not a people person," Mary Beth explained. "Her son is troublesome. She worries about him. She took this job solely to help him."
"It's better to have a troublesome son than a son like mine,"
Sarah said sadly, then shook her head. "Anyway, let's not dwell on sad things. How are the children? How are Cheryl and Zachary?" Mary Beth mentally noted that her mother-in-law had again only asked about her younger children. For Sarah, Mary Beth's eldest daughter Stacy, who was from another man, practically didn't exist. Sarah rarely asked about Stacy, and Stacy herself hadn't visited her since her stroke. And now her mother-in-law was only interested in Mary Beth's children by Scott. Not a single word about Stacy.
"It's all right, Sarah,"
Mary Beth answered evasively. "Zachary is studying and Cheryl is in the kindergarten. She's already preparing for Christmas. She'll be either a snowflake or a squirrel again." "How lovely!" Sarah's lips stretched into a smile. "My little girl is going to perform on stage. It's a pity I won't get to see her." "I'll keep it on camera, and then I'll show you everything," Mary Beth replied. "Sarah, would you like to come to get some air on the balcony? I can dress you warmly and take you out. What do you think?" The woman-in-law agreed. Mary Beth carefully dried her mother-in-law's hair, put on her warm pants and sweater, tied a scarf, and then wheeled her onto the balcony. It wasn't too cold outside, especially not on the balcony, but Mary Beth didn't want to risk exposing a sick woman to the chance of catching a cold. In her situation, any illness could be a disaster, and Mary Beth already had enough problems. Sitting in the room, watching Sarah as she curiously observed the street and passers-by, Mary Beth reflected on how much her life had changed in the past 3 years. Just 3 years ago, she had no idea what lay ahead. She was oblivious to what was happening to her husband, whom she loved and was faithful to. Sarah's room still displayed wedding pictures of Scott and Mary Beth. They looked blissfully happy in those pictures. Mary Beth was confident that they were in for a long and carefree life together, believing all difficulties were behind them. "Do you still love me?" Scott used to ask frequently. Mary Beth always smiled, nodded, kissed him, leaned into his shoulder, and felt as if he was in a fairy tale. Scott was her prince, a man unafraid to marry a woman with a child, aware of her difficult past, and ready to accept her as she was. "I don't think I've ever loved anyone as much as I love you," Mary Beth would reply. However, she never felt entirely sincere. She did truly love Scott, more than her first love, who had left a deep scar on her heart. When she married Scott, Mary Beth tried to convince herself that this was true. She believed Scott would be her first and her only lawful spouse, with whom she would have children and live a long and happy life. "Do you only think so, or are you sure of it?" Scott asked in a jealous voice. Mary Beth laughed, considering that if her husband was this jealous, he must love her deeply. Mary Beth met Scott 11 years ago. At the time, her daughter Stacy was 5 years old. Mary Beth, weary of solitude and having lost faith in genuine feelings and strong relationships, found her heart, which she thought was securely shut, slowly starting to open. Scott was very persistent in his courtship. "I have a child," Mary Beth cautioned, but Scott wasn't deterred by the presence of a 5-year-old daughter in his beloved's family. "So what? Do you think that if a woman has a child, she no longer has the right to happiness with a man?" "I don't believe it's possible to be happy with a man," Mary Beth replied, being as sincere as possible in expressing her deepest feelings. "Believe me, you can," Scott smiled, showering Mary Beth with flowers and compliments. He managed to build a rapport with Stacy, and they began to spend more time together as a trio. This was critical to Mary Beth, seeing that the man she had opened her heart to could get along with her own daughter. Mary Beth was curious about rushing into a relationship with Scott. She observed him diligently, trying to avoid the same mistakes she had made before meeting him. Everything changed when Mary Beth discovered she was pregnant. "I'm pregnant," she told Scott, her voice filling with confusion. She wasn't ready for another motherhood, but it was more than just welcoming a new life. It was about building a family with Scott. "I'm so glad," Scott responded, his eyes shining with joy, delight, and anticipation. "I wanted a baby. I want you to give me a son." "And what if it's a daughter?" Mary Beth asked cautiously. Seeing Scott's joyful expression, she felt reassured. "Then we'll have a daughter first and a son later," he confidently replied. Soon after they got married, Mary Beth and her daughter Stacy moved from their hostel at the sewing factory, where Mary Beth worked as a seamstress, to Scott's apartment. "I don't want you to work at the sewing factory," Scott said. "It's hard work, and you're pregnant." "But there aren't many good jobs in the city," Mary Beth countered. "Where would I go? And I'm pregnant." "You'll come to our construction company," Scott replied confidently, leaving Mary Beth amazed. "In construction while being pregnant is better than working in a garment factory?" He chuckled. "I'm not suggesting you work on the construction site itself. My director needs an assistant to cover for his employee's absence. She's having elective surgery, and it'll take at least 4 months to recover. So you'll work instead. You need a calm, stable job, and my boss needs a secretary. Your tasks won't be complex, just filing documents and serving tea to visitors. It's no more complicated than your current job." Mary Beth didn't object. Furthermore, the Scott salary offered was almost double her factory wage. The contract was temporary, but convenient, and Mary Beth was glad anyway. But of course, she found it difficult to believe that things could line up so well. For over 5 years, she had lived without the hope of meeting a good man who would take care for her and her child. Then Scott entered her life, bringing with him a new job, a better dwelling, and a supportive mother-in-law. When Zachary was born, Mary Beth was immersed in the challenges of motherhood. Having had experience with a small child, she didn't encounter any particular difficulties with the baby. Sarah supported her, and Scott worked diligently to save money for a larger house. "We're cramped in this 2-bedroom apartment," he reasoned. "I believe we can afford a 3 or 4-bedroom apartment in a year or 2, and then we'll have another child." Mary Beth smiled contentedly. She felt joyful. Life with Scott was peaceful and straightforward. He tackled all problems without creating new ones. As planned, Scott managed to save enough money within 2 years for the family to move into a 3-bedroom apartment. Then he started contemplating another child. "Are you sure, Scott?" Mary Beth asked, her voice filled with doubt. "I'd like to return to work. After Zachary's birth, I've been confined to the house. I feel like I could be more useful if I worked." "You are working," replied her husband. "You're serving as my wife, the mother of our children, and the caretaker of our home. While Zachary is small, you can stay home with him. No need to request leave or sick days from a boss. I earn enough money. You can continue managing the household. Once we have another child, we can discuss your return to work." Mary Beth no longer argued with her husband. Scott, having accepted that he made all the critical decisions in their family. He earned the income, wisely managed the budget, and ensured that Mary Beth and their children had everything they needed. Mary Beth's mother-in-law also played a vital role in this arrangement. She was still working and helped support her son's family both financially and by babysitting the children. When Mary Beth discovered she was pregnant with her 3rd child, everyone was delighted. But when Cheryl was born, something in the family changed. Mary Beth noticed Scott distancing from her for reasons unknown, and she only learned after Scott's death that he had been seeing another woman since her pregnancy, and until Cheryl turned 2. That day he was driving from work, and there was another woman next to him, and they got into a fatal accident. Scott and the woman were killed on the spot. Later at the funeral, the woman's husband told Mary Beth the truth. It turns out that she had already filed for divorce from him, and Scott was going to leave his family, but he did not have an opportunity to do it. "I knew everything," Mary Beth's mother-in-law confessed 40 days after Scott's funeral. "I knew about Rose, that she was pregnant, and that he was planning to leave you for her." "Why didn't you tell me?" Mary Beth asked, feeling betrayed once again, this time by her deceased husband's mother. His death, the news of his affair, and now her mother-in-law's words, it all felt like a vicious cycle Mary Beth was struggling to escape. "Because I was against it," Sarah retorted. "I tried to reason with Scott, to make him see sense. He had children, responsibilities. He swore he wouldn't abandon his children, but he wouldn't leave Rose either. God punished him. Him, me, and Rose." "He punished me too, didn't he?" Mary Beth cried, feeling her strength to shed tears waning. "You were simply a victim of circumstances," her mother-in-law had said. Sarah was deeply affected by the death of her only son, Scott. The once active woman quit her job, became a recluse, stopped interacting with friends and visiting her grandchildren, and suffered a stroke less than a year later. Mary Beth, by that time, had managed to find a job as a hotel administrator. Job opportunities in the town were scarce. The garment factory had shut down, and all the decent-paying jobs were taken. It was challenging for Mary Beth to find work without good experiences or a good education. And now, 3 years after Scott's passing, Mary Beth was still struggling to move on. Financial difficulties persisted, and her oldest daughter added to the stress. Meanwhile, Mary Beth's mother-in-law interrupted her painful reminiscing. A knock on the balcony door signalled she was ready to return inside. Mary Beth glanced away from the wedding photo, no longer holding any significance. and helped get the wheelchair-bound woman back into the apartment. "What's interesting outside?" Mary Beth asked routinely, assisting Sarah with her clothes. "Nothing. Just grandmothers sitting on the bench discussing someone. If I were healthier, I'd sit downstairs with them and gather gossip." Mary Beth didn't reply. She was eager to return home and start her numerous chores, awaiting her at home. Changing the linens, doing laundry, preparing dinner, and making lunch for the next day. Stacy used to assist her, but now she lived elsewhere, so there were no expectations of help from her. "May I leave now, Sarah?" Mary Beth asked. Her mother-in-law nodded sadly. "Of course, go. You have your day off. You've helped me, fed me, bathed me, walked me. Thank you, dear, for not leaving me alone." Mary Beth bid her mother-in-law goodbye and headed home. Her car was stuttering, and the revs were jumping, indicating it needed repairs. How long could she continue driving this old car before it broke down in the middle of the city? She would need to call a tow truck, take it to a service station, an expense that her modest single-mother budget hadn't anticipated. "Hold on, dear," Mary Beth coaxed her car, which alternated between sneezing and stalling. "Just hold on until the advance payment, then I'll get you fixed." Mary Beth realized it needed new spark plugs, an oil change, and a replacement battery. The list of necessary repairs made her uneasy, especially as she didn't have any spare money. The car was her only means of transportation. Without it, she would have to rely on bus or taxi rides for her daily commute. It would be too inconvenient due to her way of life. Spitefully, her car refused to start the next morning. It was Saturday, so she didn't need to commute to school or kindergarten. However, she still had to figure out how to get the car to the repair shop and visit her ailing mother-in-law. Resigned, Mary Beth opened the box where she had been saving money for emergencies. She sighed heavily, realizing the entire savings would now be spent on car repairs. She wouldn't be able to afford a new winter jacket or boots, and would have to wear her old clothes. However, the immediate concern was repairing a car. How was she going to get to school, work, and her mother-in-law's place without a car? Luckily, her kind neighbour, who had noticed her struggles, offered to tow the car to the repair shop. Gratefully, Mary Beth accepted. An hour later, she dropped off her car for repair, hailed a taxi, and headed to her mother-in-law's house. Later that day, Mary Beth decided it was time to seek new employment. She wondered if she could split her work week at a different job, or spend her evenings cleaning offices. Money was tight, but her desire to provide for her children was strong. She browsed several online job postings, updated her resume, and sent it to various companies. She considered many roles: an administrator at a restaurant, a seller of household goods at a store, or a housekeeper at a country house. Feeling accomplished, Mary Beth started cooking when she heard the front door open. Knowing her other children, Zachary and Cheryl, were already home, she assumed it was her eldest daughter, Stacy. Indeed, Stacy stood in the hallway with her bag, visibly displeased to be home. Mary Beth greeted her, deciding not to cause a scene. After all, she knew Stacy would have countless rebuttals to any criticism. "Hi," mumbled Stacy as she removed her coat. "Thought I wasn't coming back already?" Mary Beth shook her head. "I've been waiting for you every minute. Are you hungry?" she asked. Stacy glanced at her mother with a look of hunger. Mary Beth felt a mix of emotions towards her daughter. On one hand, she felt sorry for Stacy, who, in an attempt to assert her independence and adulthood, had proven to be a small, helpless girl who was forced to return home. On the other hand, Mary Beth knew this was inevitable. Starting an independent life at 16, without being prepared, was foolish and reckless. Despite her claims of maturity and wisdom, Stacy was far from it in reality. That evening, the whole family shared dinner. For the first time in several days, Mary Beth felt a sense of calm, despite the challenges that lay ahead. Zachary, occasionally glanced at his older sister, but remained silent. Mary Beth refrained from reprimanding anyone further. The next morning, Mary Beth awoke in a less gloomy mood, unlike the preceding days. Even the sight of Francesca at the reception desk didn't dampen her spirits. "Go to the accounting department to write an application for withholding," Francesca reminded. Mary Beth merely nodded in response. She had little hope that her supervisor would forget the incident involving the guest who fell asleep. And then, after lunch, she received a call from the restaurant inviting her for an interview. Could this be the end of my bad luck? Mary Beth thought, feeling a surge of hope. The meeting with the restaurant director was scheduled for the next day, after 2100. Now, she had to figure out how to have time to prepare dinner and supervise the children before school and kindergarten. "Don't worry, I'll handle everything," Stacy told her in the evening, after Mary Beth mentioned her interview. "You can go without concern." Mary Beth was taken aback. Stacy seemed somber, but less confrontational than usual. What had happened while she was away? Had the young man she was living with hurt her? Mary Beth considered asking Stacy, but didn't dare risk disturbing the fragile peace that had returned to their family. "Thank you, Stacy," was all Mary Beth could say, looking gratefully at her eldest daughter. The sudden snowfall the following day disrupted all plans. Hailing a cab after work became a significant challenge. Mary Beth, who had hoped to secure a new job, suddenly worried she might lose her opportunity to make a good impression. Her shift worker was also late due to the weather, leaving no spare time and exacerbating an already tough situation. Bundled in her coat and using her scarf to shield her head from the wind, Mary Beth tried to find a ride. Cars kept driving past. No one seemed willing to help with this weather, even for a fee. "Excuse me, do you know the bus schedule?" Mary Beth turned to see an elderly man addressing her, as there was no one else around. She noticed that he wasn't dressed for the weather. He wore a thin jacket, a cap, and shoes with thin soles. She wondered where he could have come from in this weather and at this hour. "Grandfather, the buses don't run too late anymore," Mary Beth said back. "It's almost 9 in the evening. Now the only option is a cab." "A cab?" The elderly man looked at her incredulously. "And how do I find one?" "By calling a phone number, or from application. But there are no cars available, I tried." "I'm so cold," the elderly man complained. Mary Beth looked at him in surprise. Given the weather and his condition, it was no wonder he was cold. "I need to see my son. I promised to meet him, and he'll be waiting for me at the train station. I got on the wrong bus and ended up downtown. How can I get to there now?" Mary Beth only wanted to tell him that she couldn't help, but just then a car stopped nearby. "Where do you need to go?" asked the driver. Looking at the elderly man, Mary Beth confidently replied, "First to the train station, then to the Grand Restaurant." When the driver said his fee, Mary Beth exclaimed, "Such a large fee for a 15-minute drive?" But there was no other choice, so she carefully helped the elderly man into the back seat and sat next to him. "I only have a few bucks with me," the elderly man complained, rummaging in his jacket pocket. "I'll pay for it. You can get off at the station, and I'll continue on my way." "But I can't do that," the elderly man protested. "It's not fair. Let me give you a part of the sum now, and the other later, so we will be even." "Let's keep driving and not distract the driver," Mary suggested. "No, that won't do," the elderly man insisted, reaching into his pocket again. "I want to pay the fare." "Let's not worry about the fare now, as you might need the money later." Mary Beth decided not to argue with him, knowing it was pointless and potentially harmful to the man's nerves to do so. "I'll give you my address, and you can bring me the money when you have it. Or your son is coming to visit you, so he might be able to bring me the money then." The elderly man reluctantly agreed. Mary Beth scribbled her address on a piece of notebook paper, slid it into the man's jacket pocket, then checked her watch and sighed with relief. She still had enough time. After dropping off a random traveller at the station, Mary Beth said goodbye and waved him off. She hoped this good deed would bring her luck in landing a job. The interview result was uncertain, but Mary Beth liked the restaurant, the working conditions, and the director, a pleasant woman, around 45 years old. "Thank you for coming," the director said. "We have more candidates, so we'll be in touch with the outcome." Mary Beth nodded, not losing hope. She hitchhiked home again, spending half as much money this time, but it still strained her modest budget. "Mum, Stacy cooked pilaf," Zachary greeted Mary Beth at the door, looking satisfied. "And it was delicious." Mary Beth stood frozen in disbelief. Her usually critical daughter had cooked something herself. Mary Beth had no idea that her oldest daughter, Stacy, even knew how to cook. "Stacy, is this true?" Mary Beth asked as she entered the kitchen and saw the sink full of dirty dishes. "Did you cook all this yourself?" "How long should we wait for you?" Stacy replied in her usual manner. "Cheryl and Zachary wanted to eat, and I prepared the meal. Try it. You might not like it." Mary Beth sat at the table, and a plate of pilaf appeared before her. It wasn't authentic pilaf, just a mix of rice, vegetables, and meat, but it was excellent. "Very tasty," Mary Beth exclaimed, finishing her portion in minutes. "I was just wondering what to cook on my way home, and you're my clever girl." Stacy gave a faint smile, quickly suppressing it. Mary Beth felt so light and relaxed that she felt like jumping up and dancing around the kitchen. To hell with financial difficulties. Who cares about the lack of a personal life? She had wonderful children. Even Stacy, with whom her relationship had seemed irrevocably damaged, had suddenly cooked a good meal and was no longer at odds with her mother. In the morning, Mary Beth peered out the window and decided not to send her older kids to school or trudge her younger daughter through the snowdrifts to kindergarten. "How about a lazy day?" she suggested, flinging open the curtains. Cheryl and Zachary responded with enthusiastic applause. Stacy was more restrained, but the relief on her face was evident. She was pleased not to have to navigate the freshly fallen snow. Together they prepared and enjoyed breakfast. Afterward, they settled on the living room couch and began debating what to watch on TV. "Cartoon!" demanded Cheryl. "Cartoons are for babies. Let's watch a samurai movie," argued Zachary. "I'll browse the internet in my room," Stacy mumbled before retreating to the bedroom. Mary Beth managed to convince the younger children to watch an animal movie, but only under the conditions that a cartoon for Cheryl and a samurai movie for Zachary would follow. Just as the three of them were finishing the cartoon, the doorbell rang. "I'll open it." Stacy emerged from her bedroom and headed for the door. "Mum, for you," she shouted from the hallway. Surprised by the weekday visitor, Mary Beth went to the door. To her surprise, it was the elderly man to whom she had paid the fare to the station. "Oh, how persistent he is! A man of his word," Mary Beth thought to herself, returning his smile. This time, the elderly man was dressed appropriately for the weather, a long insulated coat, a knitted hat, and boots with thick soles. "Come in. Why are you standing at the entrance?" Mary Beth attempted to invite the elderly man inside, but he declined. She then noticed another figure standing next to him. The entrance light was off, and she didn't immediately recognize the second man. "This is my son, Robert," the elderly man said proudly, and the younger man stepped forward. Upon seeing him, Mary Beth faltered. "It can't be. There's no such thing," she exclaimed. She looked at the man, unable to discern if it was a dream or reality. "Robert!" The man extended his hand to Mary Beth, but his hand hung in the air.
"Mary Beth, is that you?" "It's me," she replied, feeling the blood drain from her face. "Are you feeling ill?" he asked, stepping closer. Mary Beth shook her head in denial and looked helplessly at the old man. "Come in the house," she said with a weak voice, then disappeared into the kitchen. She needed a moment to catch her breath and gather her thoughts. Without turning back, she knew Robert was in the same room. She could hear his breathing in the silence. It even seemed like she could hear her own heart pounding in her chest. "I never thought I'd see you again," Robert said, breaking the silence. Mary Beth turned to see him standing in the kitchen entrance, while his father sat at the table. "So do I." "So did I." Stacy entered the kitchen, looking around in surprise before turning to her mother with a questioning look. "Shall I put the kettle on?" she asked. Mary Beth nodded in response. Robert glanced at Stacy, his gaze lingering on the girl. The unasked question hung in the air, but Mary Beth understood what Robert intended to ask. Mary Beth and Robert had met 20 years ago during their first year at the college. After a couple of months, it was clear that there was more than just friendship and the casual conversation between them. Mary Beth was in love for the first time, truly and deeply. The mere thought of Robert made her heart flutter. Robert reciprocated her feelings and didn't hide them. It seemed that a happy future was ahead of them. However, Robert's mother, Anna, worked as a dean, and she did not approve of her son's relationship with a girl from a troubled family. "You're not a match for my son," Anna had declared on her first meeting with Mary Beth. Mary Beth, in love with Robert, dismissed the warnings of his protective mother. Robert was an adult and could make his own decisions. At least, that's what Mary Beth believed. They met secretly at her dormitory, away from the prying eyes of Anna. However, Anna was aware of their continuing relationship. She was filled with frustration, but she felt powerless. "I love you," Robert once professed to Mary Beth, and she completely trusted his words. She was in her final year when she discovered she was pregnant. The doctor who confirmed her pregnancy was a friend of Anna, and she promptly informed her about that. "Here's the money," said the woman, appearing in Mary Beth's room. "Get rid of it. It's enough for the procedure and moral compensation. Leave my son alone." "I did not molest him," trying to keep cool, Mary Beth replied. "We love each other, and I'm not going to do what you asked." "What a fool," blurted out Anna. "You're putting a collar around your own neck. Do you know that Robert has another woman? My friend's daughter, a beautiful and very smart girl. With you he sleeps, and she will marry." Mary Beth felt the blood drain from her face. "It's not true, you're lying," she exclaimed. The woman's face turned red. "I've never deceived anyone, but you, on the other hand, could be capable of such deceit. You come from a family of alcoholics who only know how to lie to get money for a bottle. My son won't marry you. He was just using you for his pleasure. It's better if you take the money and do what I told you to do." "Or what?" challenged Mary Beth. "Or I'll do anything to have you expelled from the college and leave you without a job or means of support." Mary Beth responded with a defiant shake of her head. As soon as Anna left, Mary Beth immediately called Robert. He didn't answer, and in the following days he didn't appear in the college. Later, she was told that Robert's grandmother had fallen ill, and he had gone to her in another state. Mary Beth tried to call him, but he didn't pick up, and then the only response was the mechanical voice of the answering machine. "The subscriber is temporarily unavailable." As Anna had threatened, Mary Beth was expelled from the college for violating the discipline. This left Mary Beth without a diploma and without the opportunity to live in a dormitory, but she had a healthy daughter, whom she named after her grandmother. Mary Beth and Robert didn't see each other for 17 years. Now he stood in her kitchen next to her daughter,
looking into her face. "Let's talk," he suggested. "About what?" she shrugged. "It's been so many years. What should we talk about?" "Maybe about the fact that I might have a child?" Upon hearing the conversation, Stacy flinched and looked at her mother. Mary Beth decided there was no point in lying or withholding the truth. Everyone was an adult and understood that any lie would eventually be revealed. "You do have a daughter. It's strange that you didn't care for all 16 years of her life." The elderly man sitting at the table, waiting for tea, looked anxiously at everyone. "Son, what is this woman saying? Do you have a child?" "Your son has a daughter," Mary Beth responded on behalf of Robert, "whom your wife adamantly refused to acknowledge or meet. She ensured your son was oblivious to the existence of his daughter. Or didn't she? Or was it just Robert who didn't want to know?" Tears began to well up in Mary Beth's eyes. She didn't want to fight them, nor did she want to lie or pry. She simply wished to bury herself in the blanket and hide from everything. "I did want to know. My mother hastily sent me to my grandmother's due to her bad health. I didn't even get a chance to bid you farewell. My mother took the phone and claimed that she'd lost it." I believed her. Yes, I always trusted my mum. I tried to reach you out through friends, wanting to know your whereabouts and how you were doing, but you were no longer at college. It was only before her death that my mother confessed everything. She regretted her actions. "Our town is too small for you to not find me," Mary Beth retorted, "and it appears you aren't as persistent as your parents." Perhaps. Robert was now looking at Stacy, and she kept her gaze on her father. "Except that you got married, changed your last name, and I realized that it was too late to change anything. You had your life, I had mine. We'd gone our separate ways." "I got married 5 years after I gave birth to Stacy. You had 5 years to find me and your daughter." "All those 5 years, I knew nothing about having a daughter at all." Mary Beth couldn't contain herself any longer and burst into tears. Stacy ran up to her mother to hug her, tears spilling from both of them, out of resentment, anger, hopelessness, and longing. An hour later, everyone was sitting quietly at the table drinking tea. The elderly man, who was the main reason for the reunion, was silent and occasionally dabbed his eyes with a paper napkin. Robert looked at Mary Beth, who averted her eyes. She felt a painful, yet incredibly relieving sensation, as if a massive avalanche of emotion had covered her. For 17 years, Mary Beth seemed to live a life that wasn't her own, and now she stood at the threshold of significant change. She didn't know whether these changes would be for the better or not, but she was determined not to let herself be hurt again. "Mum confessed everything to me 5 years after we broke up," Robert said. "She was gravely ill and tormented, not so much physically but morally, because she realized that you went against her and had a child. This meant that somewhere out there was her only grandchild, a child she would never see. Mum regretted what she did to you, and most of all she regretted that she would never be able to ask you for your forgiveness." "Do you have any other children?" Stacy asked Robert. "Unfortunately, no. I was married, but I didn't feel real. All these years, I felt as if I was playing a role. I worked hard, earned money, helped others, but I failed to help my daughter. I suppose there's no forgiveness for me." "There is," Stacy answered unexpectedly. "Forgiveness is always necessary. Right, Mum? You'll forgive me for acting like a fool, won't you? I behaved poorly and regretted it. Then I saw other parents and realized that you're not just good, but the best." Mary Beth smiled through her tears. The phone rang. It was the director of the restaurant where Mary Beth had an interview the previous day. "Hello? We are ready to offer you a job," the woman said. Are you ready to start working?"
"Ready," Mary Beth replied, realizing that she was prepared for everything. A new job and a new life. If fate gave her a second chance to meet Robert again, it must mean something.